Welcome to our Monday Market
Recording in progress.
study session. We have a pretty packed schedule, um, and we're going to start off with diversity, equity, and inclusion and work our way through three pretty meaty topics. Because time is short, I'd like to just ask my colleagues to ask if their questions pretty pithy and to the point, so that we can get through all of these topics. And so I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to Sheldon. Let her start.
All right, good afternoon, council members, mayor, city teammates that have joined us, and community that might be here or listening. As always, I always start with gratitude for the opportunity to share all the work that I and other teammates have been working on. Again, my name is Chow Motella, and I have the great pleasure of serving the city of Rochester as a Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Director. Today, you will get an opportunity to hear from two wonderful teammates as well as myself. I would like to mention, though, that even though you're hearing from just a couple of people, all of the work that we do is done with all other city teammates in different departments. And that collective and work and collaboration allows us to be as successful as we are and to make the amount of progress that we're able to make in this space. I also want to mention that these two areas are areas that you have asked questions about or wanted to know a little bit more about. So this is an opportunity to have a comprehensive conversation on these two topics, with the idea that we'll come back later in the year, hopefully a couple more times, with additional topics in the DI space that you might want to hear about. So with that, I will share that we will start out with our language access and accessibility. We had an opportunity to apply for a fellowship program that allowed us to have the time, money, and a person who would join us and focus on this area to the extent that he has. So Jacob, you would please join me.
Hi there. So as Chow had mentioned, my name is Jacob Metz. Last May, I graduated with my master's degree in public policy from the Kennedy School, and I'm here as part of a 2-year-long fellowship through the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative, focused on accessibility and language access. And for me, before I start out, I just want to emphasize that with anything, this is all a work in progress. The work that we're doing in terms of serving our community members with disabilities and what that would look like, we're serving our community members with limited English proficiency. It'll take time to continue to get this right. And so that's something that I'm going to share with you today, just what that's looked like up until now. And also, Chow and I discussed this earlier, but one of the reasons that I had chosen Rochester is I originally worked in St. Louis right after I received my undergraduate degree for the Deputy Mayor of Racial Equity there, post-Ferguson. So I've always been very interested in what equity looks like within local government specifically. And for me, I saw what Rochester has done related to DEI and related to equity over the last several years. And I thought that, one, I was impressed with what it has looked like over the last several years. And two, I wanted to actually join and help. Because to me, to care about DEI is to care about good service delivery within government. So thrilled to be here. And a thank you to all the community members and teammates who have made the work that I've done right now I'm going to share with you currently possible. And it'll be based off of my work with them and learning from them that this is going to actually be successful over time. So just to start, these are the two main questions, my scope of work that I'm going to focus on. One is, how can the city of Rochester best serve and work with community members with disabilities? And two, how can the city of Rochester best serve and work with community members with limited English proficiency? So again, trying to make this broad so I can both look at what other city governments have done and then think about how can we best customize that for Rochester specifically. So just to start out with accessibility, this is some basic data related to disability within our community. All of this data is based off of just the US Census Bureau and what they typically ask. There are 6 main questions asking about a cognitive difficulty, ambulatory difficulty, independent living, hearing, vision, or self-care. These give us a good idea of kind of where we are, but it isn't all encompassing. As we know, disability is a spectrum as within any identity, but this allows us to know that at least 12,000 community members do have a disability, or around 10% of our population, just to have a good idea of who it is that we're trying to serve and think about here. And specifically what I wanted to focus on was the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, and how we can be compliant with it under Title II of the ADA, which is what is specific for state and local governments. So I know that one of the things that this council has heard and that I've heard quite a bit over my last 6 months here is about paratransit and what our ZIPs has looked like. So I've been working to understand a little bit more about that, as well as doing some ride-alongs to understand from community members what does ZIPs look like for them. I've been going through our data as well and learning from our dispatchers that are there and drivers. But now we have a mobility coordinator who has been hired, who is focusing on that full time. So I'm going to do whatever I can to support her and her work going forward with that. So I just wanted to give an acknowledgement of that work with paratransit. But I wanted to mainly focus on this broader accessibility question related to Title II. So these are the four main things that local governments are supposed to do, just baseline under the ADA. A reasonable accommodation procedure to be able to access city services, programs, and activities. So giving community members whatever it is they need to be able to successfully participate within a program, service, or activity. So thinking about what that accommodation process looks like. A grievance procedure for community members to be able to understand if they wanted to file a complaint because of belief that they've been discriminated against on account of their disability, and making sure we have an internal process to deal with that. A transition plan to understand how to navigate the built environment for people with disabilities and make sure that it is constructed in a way to allow for the most effective navigation of that built environment, and then a self-evaluation plan for city policies and services. And on those last two, we do have a transition plan from 2013 through the Public Works Department, and I've been talking with our city engineer about that and what that's looked like. And for the self-evaluation plan, I know that the council is familiar with the JEDI audit. That is an aspect of what different departments are learning as they're going through the JEDI audit, is an environmental scan. So that environmental scan combined with the work that I intend to do with this change management plan will help us get at that self-evaluation part. But for the reasonable accommodation, we're trying to build this out currently to where there will be a main process that community members can actually fill out if they need any number of accommodations to be able to participate, whether that's a sign language interpreter, special seating, something like a council meeting, potentially a CART system, which is like captioning and having a real-time captioner so that someone who may have a hearing disability can best understand what's happening and be able to participate fully. And so this is a mock-up of what it would currently look like if we were going to put it on the website. We understand that not everyone who would be making this accommodation request would do so via a form on a website, which is why we're trying to be mindful of what that would look like if someone were to ask for an accommodation in person or through our 311 service once that's scaled up. But this is an avenue that community members will be able to use, and we anticipate that this will be something that can be put on our website over the next several weeks to be able to make this locked and loaded. But one of the things that we're doing currently is standardizing what our vendor pool looks like to actually be able to meet those requests. So because of that, the turnaround times can be a little scattered. Different types of accommodation can require different turnaround times to get community members what it is that they need. So the more that we learn about what that looks like, the more we'll be able to provide a cleaner and more efficient answer for, oh, if you need this kind of accommodation, it typically takes around this many business days in order to get it. Same with a grievance procedure. So again, as I had said earlier, this is a complaint-based procedure. If someone feels that they have been discriminated against on account of their disability, they have a right under the ADA to be able to submit and file a complaint. And again, this is for community members. We already have a process in place for city teammates for both accommodation and also for grievance to be able to go through HR. But for this specifically, this is for community members, and we've seen what other cities have done. And so I've been trying to model it off of what they've done. And so one of the things that we'll see, again, similar to the accommodation part, community members will be able to request this either over the phone or in person, but also can fill out a form over the website. So we're trying to think about what that would look like. And I'm going to make it clear on each of the sample steps. They'll submit a complaint. A group of teammates who know best what that service is, and probably myself, will be able to look into that complaint and investigate it, and then provide a response to the community member that hopefully resolves the issue. This is not necessarily a substitute, to make clear for the council and for community members, for filing a complaint or filing a lawsuit potentially. This is just an avenue that we imagine could be a more effective way to resolve it, and certainly more cost efficient to resolve the issue. And that's one of the reasons that this is something that they have the right to do, that anyone with a disability has the right to do under the ADA. And then also an appeal process And we're figuring out what that looks like. And the more that we will actually flesh this out and get ready to roll it out, we will make sure to provide more information both to y'all as well as to the public about what this looks like. So to sum up in terms of this broader accessibility change management plan, and what I've been focusing on, in terms of what we've been doing, we're trying to do the basic things within the ADA really well. So that's the first initial part. Doing that alone would not be sufficient, and I wouldn't pretend otherwise, but it would give us momentum because to me, ADA compliance should be the floor. And we should want to look at what would it look like to make Rochester, Minnesota, one of the most accessible cities in the country. I think that should be our aspiration. That will take a long time. It'll take, years and years of work to be able to do that. But being able to lay the groundwork for that is something I care about. Because to go back to what I said earlier with that scope of work, how can we best serve community members with disabilities? I think that part of that focus is on a civic capacity as well. So not only our capacity as teammates to be able to figure out how can we best accommodate different requests, but also to make sure that we're working as closely as we can with community members with disabilities so that they are able to advocate not only for the issues they see affecting their specific community, but also the community as a whole. And other cities could have examples like an accessibility commission or an accessibility coordinator to be able to focus on those issues. In terms of whether that is specifically right for Rochester for those two specific things, I think that that's up for debate, and that's more a question that the council will be able to look into, as well as something that we'll consider. But in terms of the function that they provide, that is something that I think is what we should think about because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just got to customize it for Rochester. And so this is kind of what I've been doing, focusing on key community partners and meeting with them and learning from them as well as understanding just basic things like our website accessibility. There's a rule coming from the Department of Justice to make sure that we're as compliant with what's called WCAG guidelines or web content accessibility guidelines to make sure that anyone who is, for instance, using a screen reader is able to navigate our website with ease or that the contrast ratio between like the brightest color and the least bright color on the website is appropriate for someone who may have a visual disability when navigating our website. So that's something I'm working with teammates on. And in terms of where we're going, it's that comprehensive plan about what would it look like to go above and beyond just ADA compliance, as well as working with teammates who have graciously agreed to be part of an accessibility team so that there are any number of teammates currently throughout the city who are working with community members with disabilities pretty constantly, but they're not necessarily coordinated with one another or talking to one another about what it is that they're seeing. So being able to provide that coordination and then learn from them going forward is something that we're trying to be more mindful of. And then, of course, working with community members as well. So to go into the language access part, for limited English proficiency, this is something I'll be using throughout this talking about this. Individuals who don't speak English as their primary language or have a limited ability to read, speak, write, or understand English. So I'll be saying LEP, and this is what I mean, limited English proficiency. So the reason that we would have to focus on this as a city is under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and specifically national origin, which is underlined right there, is the reason that states and local governments have focused on this, is to make sure that any LEP community member is able to access the services that they need or the programs that they need. And it's for anyone who receives federal financial assistance and for any federally funded program, but there are also local governments who are trying to scale this up and many who have, which we'll get into in a second. And this is the 4-factor analysis for like written translation. So this is like guidelines for documents that would be translated into the top non-English languages. So, an example of like the number of people who interact, who are LEP within a community, the frequency with which they may interact with that program, the nature and importance of that program, and then the resources available to us to be able to actually provide that service. So this is what will guide us as we're thinking through how can we best provide documents that are translated into languages other than English so our community members can access them. So as an overview, around 7,150 community members are LEP within the city, or 6.3%. And just to give an idea of that, Byron is smaller than that. So we have a Byron size worth of people in Rochester who are limited English proficient. So that means that there's thousands and thousands of people who we should be mindful of to make sure that they can actually interact with government services and activities in the language that feels most appropriate for them. These, according to what we've seen from RPS, are the top 5 non-English languages spoken within Rochester: Spanish, Somali, Arabic, Khmer, and Chinese. And sometimes this can go in and out depending on other sources in terms of, which one is like third or which one is fourth. But based off of what we've seen either from Olmsted County court interpreter requests or from even RPU language line data, it's typically these 5 languages. So this is something that will guide us as we begin to implement this and go forward. So again, for comparison, we have cities across the country with smaller percentages of LEP community members who have language access plans that have been ready to go and have been in effect for several years. So it's true both for percentage, and it's true both for cities that are actually smaller or about the same size as Rochester. So it would, one, yes, be proactive, because I know in a previous study session, Deputy Administrator Steinhauser had commented on the fact that there's going to be significant population growth over the next several decades. So it would make sense to get ahead of this now by focusing on looking at language access as being baked into the baseline of just how we do things, and be proactive now, because it will be a pay me later or pay me now or pay me later situation in my eyes. So that's why I want to make sure that we can get this off the ground now. This is an example of some of the interactions that we've seen where people and teammates have come across some of those language barriers. So anything that could be really serious, such as de-escalating an emergency situation, all the way to something that matters but isn't maybe necessarily as high stakes, like checking out a book at the library or navigating, various services at the library, is something that we've seen language barriers come up again and again and again. And there's not necessarily the tools or resources to help teammates be able to navigate those in the best way possible. This, again, is the result of a survey I've given to teammates, and I'm continually trying to boost responses for that. And currently we have over 20% of all city teammates have responded to this, and I've gone to different meetings to be able to understand, well, what does this look like for you and your work? So I've seen that this is something that is pretty significant, again, that I think means that we should have a language access plan. So similarly to what I had said earlier in terms of what we've been doing, that survey, we're trying to build out a centralized process to be able to request interpreters or translate documents so that it doesn't just fall on each individual teammate to figure out what that looks like, because that's time that they could spend doing literally anything else. So if this is something that was already in place, it can make it easier for all city teammates. We're looking into what a bilingual pay differential could look like to be able to pay teammates for the skill of knowing a language other than English. That's still in its exploration phases, because we want to make sure that we can both accommodate that skill for when a teammate is asked to translate or to interpret, while also not interrupting their existing workflow. So we're figuring out what that looks like, and that's still in early stages. We joined the Municipal Language Access Network, a network that is national of different language access coordinators across the country. So we've been able to understand more of what that looks like, as well as benchmarking other community partners. And similarly to accessibility in terms of where we're going, I'm focusing on trying to build out a comprehensive language access plan and create an internal language access team, which we've done, to be able to think through what does this look like in different departments so that we can actually work on implementing this together. And then similarly, trying to focus on training and operating procedures for city teammates to know when this does come up, what's the best practice, if it's in the field, if it's over the phone, what have you, in all those different situations, trying to prepare city teammates so that they can best serve LEP community members. And then, of course, and to me, most critically, laying the groundwork for community engagement with LEP community members themselves. So that is what I have currently in terms of where we are. And again, I'll emphasize that this is a work in progress in terms of figuring this out. It'll far outlast my time here, but in terms of getting the initial momentum focused for related to both accessibility and language access, I think that this gives us the momentum that we need in order to say we are making demonstrated progress on both of these issues. And frankly, it will take working with community members and as many teammates as possible to understand how best to do this and to make sure that it holds. And with that, I'll take any questions that you have.
Yeah, it's regarding this slide 18, this last one here on the screen. So as you only have 20% response at this point, across the department. Hopefully we can work to continue to improve that as we move along. And as you find persons working for the city in different departments with language skills, is the intent to kind of do a cross-department support, if you will? If you have someone that works in public works with a language issue and the clerk's office has someone that comes in that speaks a language and we have an employee, are you looking at it for that purpose, or is it going to be a different kind of service that you'll offer?
Do you mean for the bilingual pay differential part?
Well, not even for the pay, just for support for citizens who might come in, for a parking ticket. If there's someone that has Khmer and comes in to talk and there's no one in the department that can help, but we happen to have someone over in HR that can speak that language, would you borrow them, if you will? Or is there a different plan to be able to help the resident that would come in?
That's still something we're figuring out in terms of what it would look like to, like, for instance, borrow like a teammate from another department. Language line is something that could be available potentially in that situation,
Mhm.
as well as potentially using any app like In a Pinch. But specifically for the bilingual pay differential part, that can look different and does look different for any city. Multiple cities and counties have that in place.
Mhm.
Sometimes it could mean that a teammate from HR could come in to help, but that would be dependent on department heads in terms of what they feel most comfortable with, as well as what we notice is most effective. But that's a potential solution to be able to help a community member who comes to like the clerk's office window. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Couple questions too. I have a couple questions too. Sorry. I'm organizing, wanting my colleagues to have a thought, but I just wanted to say thank you for your presentation. That was very wonderful. I appreciate you going into the community and riding along and doing some groundwork, trying to find out the barriers that people face. So that's wonderful. It's a daunting task for so many different needs in a diverse community. So I had a lot of questions. I'm trying to scale back. I sent an email out to, I believe you and then several others who are presenting today, saying that I believe that this council session is overly crammed, packed with important information and should not be rushed. I think each one of these topics deserve an entire session. I apologize for my voice, with the ongoing laryngitis here, but a couple questions is with the grievance policy. I know there's a lot of, I know people worry about that because when the city hires and, like funds an investigator for HR or for any grievance, there is a perception, which I'm not saying is not reality, which it
Mr.
might be,
President,
that there is,
Mr. President, if I may
what
intervene,
kind of,
City Attorney, floor, please.
any discussion that relates to Councilmember Dennis's situation or
this is not relating to my situation.
or obviously from that situation is not appropriate. It's out of order. It's part of pending litigation. For the
I do not
courts.
appreciate this.
So
kind
you
of
just mentioned
streamlined-
the private
my-
investigator, Ms. Dennis? That is.
Well, when you talk about
clearly
the
germane
grievance-
to the litigation at hand, this is a very inappropriate line.
So you don't hire someone to investigate, is that correct? I was
Mentioned
hearing.
in the past tense. So please, let's just move on.
Okay, no, I was just like, just yes or no. So the city will hire someone to investigate a complaint, is that correct?
For a grievance procedure specifically,
Yes.
it's the law for us to be able to designate an existing employee to be able to both receive those requests, and then they are the ones who will work with teammates to be able to investigate what that looks like. And again, it's for community members to be able to utilize.
So if a community member, you ask a complaint, then it's a city employee who is investigating whether or not the city discriminated or violated ADA, is that correct?
Mr. President, I suggest that,
This is legitimate questions. I'm
Hold-
sorry.
hold on.
I have the
Let-
floor.
let
Ms.
the
Dennis, you're
President run the
clearly
meeting.
straddling the line between
It is not-
personal
It
grievances.
is not clearly straddling any line, and I do not
Please move
appreciate,
on. Please
do
move
not
on.
appreciate assuming
Please
intent.
move on. Thank you.
The grievance procedure is a question brought up by a resident, and I feel that this is a real legitimate concern. That
Need to
is,
move on to the next question, Mr.
if you do
President.
not want to hear residents' concerns, I don't know why we are even on council.
Please ask your next question.
Okay, I appreciate not being talked down to. Thank you. So lived experience definitely is expert experience when people have, we all come from, as a school teacher, we have all backgrounds and different lived experiences. Well, I've been very open with my lived experience back, well, before I was elected to, with my neurodevelopmental processing disability, ADHD, which is a protected federal.
Point of order,
disability.
Mr. President.
So when I speak
Mr.
on-
President, Councilmember Dennis, you need to stop speaking when there's a point of order and give the president a chance to rule.
You have the floor, please.
It appears that the question is in the same line of reflecting on Councilmember Dennis's own situation and her experience with the city. It's inappropriate. It's part of a court proceeding now. It needs to be directed that direction. If there's a specific question about process that is generic, she can ask it.
It isn't bad faith to assume intent. I know this for attorneys, but I do want to say that where your comment saying that, and I believe this presentation is long overdue. I know I have been asking for this for years now to have ADA training and or information brought. So I appreciate it's finally now being addressed. But you mentioned one of the most, we want to be, and I'm not going to quote you maybe exactly, but we want to be one of the most accessible cities in the country, community, I don't know, your quote exactly in the country, which I think is wonderful because of course the home of Mayo Clinic, the best hospital in the world, having accessibility is so important. So I'm speaking and I gave like a foreshadow of my experience with hidden disabilities are often overlooked. Autism, ADHD, traumatic brain injuries, things that are not visible, like if you're in a wheelchair or you need Braille for help with reading and things like that. Those disabilities are very much are more easily recognized and accommodated for. So in the email that I presented before this meeting, is there any thought on how people who struggle with different disabilities, and then of course that adds into people who are economically challenged, who have, of course, we talked about language barriers, people who have education differences. I mean, to use websites and the way we're trying to get information out is difficult for a lot of people. And I've talked to people saying, we have issues with having access to the internet, so I mean, like, so is there a way of addressing people with, let's say, traumatic brain injury, autism, ADHD, who will not use screens or, sources like 311, they need questions answered by a live person. So me referencing my own lived experience was to illustrate that I know from experience in communities and support groups I've been involved with, there's a lot of people who struggle getting information with disabilities that aren't always recognized. Thank you. If you can elaborate how populations who are struggling in those situations can get information if technology is not an option. Thank you.
So that speaks to one of the things that I had said earlier, that there should be multiple avenues to be able to either make a request or be able to receive that information. And I appreciate what you had said earlier about how, there are community members who may need material in Braille, or who, like, we want to be mindful of all these different disabilities that perhaps aren't as visible, as you had said. And so one of the things that I've been looking at is seeing how other cities actually best accommodate those requests. So looking at how the city of Seattle has done it, looking at how the city of St. Paul has done it, just to be able to understand a little bit more about any of the requests that could actually come through for any number of those disabilities. You had also mentioned autism and TBI. So I've talked with people from both the from groups who have discussed what it means to have autism within Minnesota, same as what it means to have TBI within Minnesota, to understand what does this actually look like and what is your lived experience, just to be able to understand a little bit more about what we can do on our end to be able to accommodate any requests that may come forth. So anything related to de-escalating certain situations and people being mindful of the difficulties with de-escalating certain situations depending upon a hidden disability is one thing. So training on that is something that I think is certainly worthy of consideration for city teammates who may find themselves in those sorts of interactions. And then in terms of any materials, again, to go back to that, like having sensory kits, for instance, like maybe through like our parks department or at the library for anyone there, or for having certain spaces to be able to like decompress that it, like within new city construction is another thing that we're thinking of. So in terms of what services would look like, that's one of the things that we're thinking of to be able to address anyone with any sort of disability, especially if they're hidden. And then in terms of requesting that information, we have a list of what it looks like now, but by no means is it exhaustive. So I think that going forward, again, it'll be a work in progress as we learn what is the best thing that we need to do to be able to accommodate any requests that could come up. That's what I noticed.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in deference to
Yeah, Your Honor, just, I think one thing that's really important as you frame this particular part of the conversation, and whether it's in the employment context or in the context that Jacob's, talking about specifically here, in terms of accessing public services, that the key standard still really is, are we making reasonable efforts, right? And so I think that's ultimately part of, we make through, these are all very unique individual discussions as we talk about how to best accommodate the public's access to services, but just bearing in mind, it's not any, accommodation that, we have to make. It's a reasonable accommodation, and, we just have to really bear that in mind. That's kind of the standard that we really aspire to here and are trying to make sure that we, honor in the process.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move on to the next topic, please.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, council members, mayor. My name is Julie Brock. I am the program manager for the Equity and Built Environment Program. This was a program that started in, January of 2021 is when we were awarded. And I have had the privilege to be that program manager then from that time, or from February of 2023 till now, so just over a year. This program was spun out of the Global Mayor's Challenge that the city of Rochester was able to be awarded, and it is a $3 million investment over 3 years. We, of course, decided that Rochester can do better. So we actually took that money and we were able to leverage Department of Labor monies to invest in this as well. And this has been built with sustainability at the forefront from the very beginning. This is a program that requires and relies on the partnership of our other community partners. So I will go ahead and get into the program overview. Why did we decide that this was the population? Looked at the data and we recognized that women of color were both historically marginalized as well as impacted the most by COVID-19. So as we started to look at the intersectionality of growth of Rochester and this demographic, we realized that there was some investment and some very important investment that could and should happen. Just to make sure that we understand that this is not something about preferential treatment or anything like that this is a program that requires training, it requires access, and it requires a partnership between the industry partners as well as the women who are getting technically trained. That's what I'll talk about today. So this program has 4 different work streams. One of the reasons why this came up as well is because women of color indicated that they didn't even know that built environment was for them. We have less than 1% of women of color on work sites. In Rochester, we have less than 2% of women of color in built environment industries across Southeast Minnesota, according to Department of Employment and Economic Development. So we knew that we had a problem, right? And that problem could be solved with 4 different work streams that we have. The first is the K-12 career exploration. So just getting upstream and talking with women to say, hey, there's so many opportunities. You want to sell houses, you want to design houses, you want to build houses, you want to maintain houses, you want to maintain buildings, you want to inspect houses, you want to inspect buildings. There's everything from all of that for you. We also knew that training and wraparound services for BIPOC women, Black, Indigenous, people of color, was really important. Some of the things that they noted is that childcare, transportation, these were 2 things that if we could help with those situations, then they could definitely pursue this sort of training. And then really the heart of this that I'll be talking about is diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging training for industry partners. When we did our co-design, industry partners came to the table and said, okay, we hear you, we hear you. So we have great benefits, we have great wages, but you need something more. And the women of color was very clear on what they needed. And industry said, help us. We've never had to make these types of changes, help us do that. And so that's why that work stream came to be. And I think that it is the differentiator and the secret sauce of our entire program. And the fourth one is for entrepreneurs, women who are interested in owning their own business, whether that is to provide some of that wraparound service for women through childcare that would be offered the same hours of built environment hours, or transportation that can help transporting women or their children or families. In addition to women who want to have their own construction or built environment company. So I'm going to go briefly through each of the work streams so you can see there. One of the things that we said that I had talked about last time we were here is that this year, not to be punny, but sort of, has been an infrastructure year. We wanted to make sure that we were building a foundation that was strong enough to hold the walls of this program as it goes forward. Because again, this program doesn't leave after 3 years. This program is built in for sustainability with our partners. So what did it need? It needed to make sure that we had strong partnerships with our industry partners as well as our training partners. We needed to identify some of the gaps. Some of the gaps that we identified was trainings that may have pop up, but then there's not enough enrollment, so then they go away. And so there's inconsistency of being able to access training and the ability to be able to practice or try things out so that they don't get so far down a line that those hours wouldn't work for them later. So these are some of the things that came into mind. So the K-12 is really born out of the co-design process that we did with women of color who are in the Rochester Public Schools district, as well as educators. And this is what they had proposed. They wanted a K-12 career exploration program so that women, young women can opt out. They said it was really important for it to be part of the curriculum. And they said that there was 3 elements that had to be present to really make it powerful. First, experiential learning opportunities. Put tools in our hands and let us learn how to use them. Second, parent education. Depending on where my parents come from or what their education is, they may or may not know all of the different opportunities within built environments that is open and really ready for women to enter. And then post-secondary education planning. They didn't want to be held to an outline or to make a choice between career or going into a career or going into a college setting or just into a training setting. They wanted to have options. And so these are the actions that we've taken. We started with the 11th grade pilot in the fall because we really wanted to understand how exposure to built environment would work. And it was a really actually fantastic experience with a partnership with DMC, with Workforce Development Incorporated, the city. I can't even tell you how powerful it is to have 34 mentors working with groups of students about what it takes to start their own business and what it takes to figure out how to do blueprinting and who do they have to talk to in the industry to make these things happen. 2 anecdotes that I will give you, as one woman said in our survey, I never really thought that I would ever own my own business, but meeting the community leaders of Rochester, I realized that that's where things happen and I want to be part of that. It's pretty powerful. And then the measures that we have, again, for infrastructure, we've decided what our measures will be. Some of this data is in development. We're working on getting our baseline data right now. So we'll have the number of BIPOC women who are involved in these activities so that we know how many women have been exposed to all the different built environment activities, K through 12, and then the percentage of those women indicating that a built environment career is on their post-secondary plan. I feel like that would be a good indicator to see how things are going to start to shift. The training and mentoring arm is really around the needs of women. So again, this came out of a co-design between women of color and industry professionals. Industry professionals said, you know what, anytime somebody has a background in built environment, it helps them. It helps them be a better estimator. It helps them be a better carpenter. It helps them be a better inspector. So the first question that we have for women when they enter into equity in the built environment is, do you have experience in built environment? If they say yes, then we keep going and working on their customized training plan. If they say no, then they go into our trades readiness program. It's an evergreen program. It never goes away. It's 3 semesters. It can also be condensed to be delivered in 6 weeks. We're really excited about it. It's so vitally important, like I said, for women who want to go into built environment, no matter if they're going to design it or if they're going to be inspecting it or building it, to have that experience with the raw materials. So our measures there are the number of BIPOC women engaged in the EBE training programs. Since the last time I was here, we've been doing some marketing because we were ready to market for this. And I can say over the course of February, we have 25 new women who are engaging in our engaging in our system and who have expressed interest in learning more. So we hope then that a percentage of women then will be hired into careers. Since the last time I visited, one of our participants has been hired with one of our IWE designated companies as a project coordinator, well on her path to project management, but most importantly, her vision is to stay in Rochester, become a developer so that we can wealth build for populations of color. So that's the power of equity in the built environment. And then the last is the number and percentage of women retained in industry. And again, this gets back to, it's fantastic. We could cast a big wide net, but if women aren't seen for their full value in the work site, and if they're not treated as such, then they will leave. So let's talk about the inclusive workforce designation. This is the biggest need. This was identified by industry partners. They said, we've never had to do this before. And they haven't had to do that before because construction is primarily white male in the United States of America. Just is. When you look at the percentages, that is the biggest demographic that is in built environment. So they can have there's a jargon there, there's a language there. There's some, and that can be taught, right? That can be taught, but we have to be really mindful about that. So another anecdote, we were doing a mentorship training because in order to hire out of our program, women requested that they need to have a mentor. We've trained the mentors from the companies. They identify those mentors. We train them for free. And in that mentorship training, I had a person who said, man, this isn't just good for women. This is good for all of our new hires. Unpacking all the unwritten hidden rules. Wow, powerful. Again, this is the power of this program. So each firm that partners with us, they are either working through their IWE designation or they are designated. I will say the city of Rochester is one of our partners. They have earned their IWE designation, which is exciting because we also have our apprenticeship program through the Department of Labor Extended that will be starting up this spring, where we'll be hiring 2 women to be apprentices on preventative maintenance. It's a 6-month program and then a hiring event with our partners after. So this is our measures here, number of IWE designated built environment firms, the percentage of women who are hired into those firms, and most importantly, the percentage of women then retained in those firms. And part of the IWE designation is a continuous improvement. It is asking businesses to report back. How are they keeping up on their diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging training? What other gaps are they identifying and how can we help them with those? And then the last track is entrepreneurship. So women of color who have experience in built environment and they want to start their own company or expand their own company, they are connected both through resources as well as financial support in order to get their business up and off the ground. We work in big partnership with Ready, with the Collider, with the Entrepreneurs First group, and really assessing where that business owner is and what they need. So we have 8 women that have been supported in 2023, and they're at varying places. Again, this is customizable based on their needs. So one woman is still working on establishing her EIN and deciding exactly what kind of trucking company she wants to do, whether that's water or dump. We have another company who she's already bought her first semi and she's starting to transport and she's got her distribution license or her distributor's license, and everything in between. We've helped a woman get her general contractor's license so that she could grow her residential company. We've had another who not only got her general contractor's, commercial contractor's license, but is also working with one of our partners in order then to learn the bidding process. So she's ready to be hired as a a woman-owned and minority-owned business subcontractor in season coming up in just a couple months. So again, when we think about measures, we are looking at the number of entrepreneurs engaged in our program, percentage of those entrepreneurs starting their business, and then essentially we're looking at how fast are they earning revenue after 2 years. And so again, that measure, we're not quite sure exactly if that's the right measure or not, but we still want to make sure that we're tracking their success rate. And so that you may see that change a little bit as we continue. Most importantly, we cannot do this work in isolation. It has taken every single partner, from industry partners and women and community service groups and the city, of course. So Workforce Development Incorporated is our largest sustainability partner. They are experts in this field, both in training and career navigation, as well as then holding the training for businesses. And the wraparound services. They have all of the data collection there. They have all of the expertise of doing this work. We're really quite fortunate to have them in our community. Rochester Community and Technical College, specifically the CTE and the Business Workforce Education Wing, have been incredibly helpful and really innovative. When I said we need a training that doesn't go away, they're like, whew, okay, but we need enrollment and we need the people so that we can run the program. I'm like, well, we need the program so we can get the people. So they've been really fantastic of helping us get innovative about how we keep this program running and getting more people to join it. And it's also been incredibly exciting because they are providing the certification for the on-the-job training programs. So for example, those apprentices going through the preventative maintenance program here at the city will then receive a certification through RCTC that indicates that they can go on the resume and indicates that they have earned this. The other thing that I want to mention is that when we brought this to Rochester Community and Technical College, they saw a tremendous need to make sure that we had curriculum that was nationally recognized by all of the unions. And so it is our trades readiness program delivers the M3 curriculum that is recognized by all of the unions nationwide. And we had local partners and our local union council sign a letter of support in order for us to get that going. For entrepreneurs, we work with E1, which is Entrepreneurs First, Clyder, Rochester Area Economic Development Incorporated, Destination Medical Center, Center, and we're creating an entrepreneur ecosystem. And again, what has been really fantastic about EBE is that we've been able to work with existing systems instead of being redundant. We've been able to help assist and also strengthen some of those systems that have been wanting to get off the ground. And that's really happening in the entrepreneur space. It's very exciting to work in innovation with those partners. And then Rochester Public Schools, they have been a fantastic partner with the K-12 career exploration. They've dedicated teacher time to this, curriculum time. We've expanded in the spring to 2 more economics courses. And that means that we get more community leaders coaching our kids and letting them know what is possible for them. And this is a slide that I think says it all. Oftentimes I get fielded the question, but where are the women? Where are they? Why aren't they lining up for these great benefits and these great wages? Because they're living their lives. And many women that we know of color in our community perhaps are underemployed, working 2 to 3 jobs, raising a family, and to ask them to drop all of that, join us for a maybe, that's a big ask. And also when I say construction, I cannot tell you how many times people tell me, I say, what do you think of when I say construction? And they say, white man in a hard hat, swinging a hammer. We have so much work to do around mental models. That's why I say built environment, and that's why I will fight you. I'm just kidding, I won't. But we need to be committed to language change because it's one way that we can get at that mental model, and that's where transformational change happens, one mind at a time. And so I hope that you'll join me. I hope that you'll join this because there's so much wealth building that can happen within built environment for our entire community. And we're really excited to start with women of color and expand from there. So things to note, All of this is built on co-design, period. Centered on the needs of women, accountability within the industry partners to make the changes necessary. That partnership is vital. This best practice in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, this is what matters. When I show up to work, and it doesn't matter if I'm a woman or not a woman, identifying as an individual, as a human, do I get to show up and be the human that I'm built to be? That's inclusion, and that's belonging, and that should be in every industry. And the other thing to note is that systems change takes time. And that's what I do really well, is I build systems and I test them and I build them and I test them. And that's what we're doing. We're building something for sustainability, period. Not something that is a one and done and not something that will go away. And it takes time because we're working at every single level in that six conditions of systems change, which comes from Stanford and one of the greatest minds in systems thinking, Peter Senge. So I will welcome any question that you have, and I will send that article for you to read.
Well, that's awe-inspiring and such important work. So thank you. I am just, this is, when you're talking about it takes time, I mean, this is centuries and eons, of stereotypes and things that you're trying to conquer right now. So I just want to come in for the mentoring and the partnerships. It looks like we're going to cram everything into this time, so I don't want to go through all my questions. But my one lived experience was with K-12 RPS doing the PSEO training. My daughter just was looking at that, and how you get free college credits with trained lived experiences. So I am just so happy you're partnering with the school district and our CTC. But I guess, well, some of the things you mentioned, and I just jotting down things and looking back, seeing for their potential. I know there is a lot of people, there's a lot of double standards. I'm a big believer in double standards, having experienced them as a woman myself. Councilmember Dennis, people will take you more seriously if you comb your hair. I'm like, oh, well, oh my gosh, well, I'm okay. So I mean, I know there's double standards. That's just an example from what I've literally heard here. And the hidden barriers. When you talk about unpacking the hidden rules and having mentored, I mean, this is really heavy, deep stuff that how is this being connected to other workers in the field? Because I mean, you can mentor and you can help people understand those hidden barriers, but it's the people who are sitting next to you, the people who are working next to you, who that's also ingrained in them. You can't handle the job because you're, or whatever the stereotype. How do you help with the people who are already in the field, maybe the harassment and things that could happen when people take these new jobs?
Yeah, so we have a three-prong approach to that. First and foremost, both the mentor and the new hire will be equipped with a policy, right? So they understand what the policy, what the harassment policy is, right from the forefront, and the reporting mechanism for that. So both the mentor and the participant are on that. In the IWE designation, training is to go all the way through the company. It doesn't stop at like the superintendent level or at the lead level. It goes all the way through the company. One of our companies is doing, has been integrating this into their like morning tool time talks, and it just sets the stage for the day. It's micro learnings that they do. And that's how they decided to make sure that they get it trained all the way through. And then, the other piece, and then the other piece is the mentors. When we train those, we train 2 per company. One is to be with the existing crew, and then one that is primarily with the new hire. So they are being mentored on both sides.
Wonderful. And then to follow up with this too, so what is it to protect the new hires? So if there is an issue of harassment or some issues, retaliation is a real thing,
It
right?
is.
And so it's very scary to, you're working with someone besides someone, I'm not as familiar with the construction field, but you're working with someone, and to report that person for comments or making you feel less than. What is protection is for that woman who, to make sure that she is not retaliated against, and and then the person or entity is held accountable for making sure their employees are are aware of difference. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That will change depending on which company that we're dealing with. So they each policy, there is not a standardized policy across our companies. We work with each company individually to make sure that they have policy in place. So that company then would have a policy in place on how all the way through to protect against retaliation. They would have a whole system for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
All right, and I thought that I would take this opportunity to kind of highlight some things that are coming up this year, some of them that are existing, but maybe changing slightly, others that might be brand new, for your awareness and reflection, and even, maybe if you have a couple of questions about those. So the first one that I was hoping to review quickly would be the growth that we're seeing. Sure, you haven't heard anything about that at all. But you adopted goals in 2021 that was specific to women and minority-owned businesses. They're specific to targeted business as well as workforce participation. You will note that when you adopted these goals, they're on a tiered system. So as the years go by, the threshold goes down, but that also means that the number of projects increases. So you will note that it's 2024. And so all of our projects that, according to this plan, right, that were $500,000 and above, would meet the threshold to have women and minority-owned businesses or those goals attached to them. And because we're seeing such rapid growth, we've had to make a couple of changes or amendments, or are thinking through some ways that we can meet the capacity that we have. We know that these goals have an impact on the communities that we're serving. So I wanted to share a brief overview here of what that has meant. So from 2019, so that would include DMC funded projects, city funded projects, throughout, about 7.6% are dollars that have gone to targeted businesses, right? So $8 million or a little bit above that. And we're looking at our current active public projects, about $3 million, and our private projects, about $1 million. It isn't perfect, but it is wonderful to be able to see that we have made gains in that area and that we're tracking those. You'll notice on the bottom as well that when we started in 2021, we only had 8 projects that met the threshold. And if we're looking at 2024, we are seeing about 40 projects that we have projected that will have these thresholds. In order to meet that capacity, a couple of things that we have done in the last year. The first one is staff modification. So the project manager who was working just in this process was working on both compliance as well as capacity building, modified that slightly. She is now a compliance manager, and her work will primarily just be on compliance. Now, folks would ask what happens to the capacity building, and we are sharing that responsibility within our own organization as well as with DMC. So all of the capacity building work for DMC funded projects, that work has gone to the Equitable Development Coordinator, and she'll be working on that. On our end, for city funded projects, capacity building will be managed by the Sustainability Coordinator. And I think doing that will allow us to have additional capacity to really work on our capacity building, whether it is working with businesses to get certified, informing some of the RFP process, building toolkits within our own organization, creating a lean process for managing all of these projects. That will be done here with additional folks who are working in that particular space. The other thing we're doing is evaluating our goal phasing to try and understand if what you adopted and what we suggested is working, if it's best, if the process is too fast or too slow. And I bring this up just so that when something comes up later, you have awareness that that is a process that we're going through currently. If you look on the bottom there for 2024, this year, we have approximately 30 projects that meet this threshold, about $1 million and above. It's a lot of projects to manage compliance and capacity building on. And then for those that are $0.5 million to $1 million, approximately 10 projects. So Joy Johnson informed me today that maybe that's down to 3 projects because some have been moved towards the end of the year. But just being cognizant of that and not really knowing what's going to happen. And so one of the things we're also exploring is the idea of maybe some projects that are larger projects may have compliance embedded within by the consultant that's working on that. So providing a little bit of an overview for your thoughts, for your exploration. If you have additional questions, please send them my way and over to Dory Johnson. We could see how we respond to those.
Could you describe what a project is?
Thank you. A project would be, it's really hard to say, just have a project. For example, a water reclamation plant update that's happening, that would be a project. Or all the improvements that we're hoping to make to Martin Luther King Park, that would be a project.
So it wouldn't be a house.
No, it wouldn't be a house. It would either be a DMC funded project, city funded project, could be a federal funded project or state funded project. And all of those different ones have different thresholds, have different targeted business goals that are set to them. And it is imperative, certainly for those that are federal and state funded, that we manage that compliance well so that we can keep our dollars appropriately. But also, we are really focused on the economic mobility of our community members. We need to make sure that we are including women and minority-owned businesses and participating in all of those projects. Mayor, you had a question?
Yeah, and that was what I was going to ask you to define for folks who might not be as familiar with targeted business contracting and workforce participation goals, what we're talking about. So I wondered if you could just define that for someone who might be listening in. What does that mean?
Thank you for that question. So what that means essentially is that we want to ensure that as we are bidding out projects for prime contractors, subcontractors, et cetera, that we are ensuring that we're including women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, local businesses in that system. Traditionally, what has happened is a lot larger companies that have a lot of experience have been the primary folks who have received our projects. We're making sure that we want to diversify that and create processes that allow everybody to participate in the marketplace, and particularly for the dollars that we're utilizing.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll continue.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, I didn't want to cut you off. Are you? Okay.
Sure.
So I was going to sidetrack a little bit. It brought me back to a question. Maybe I was going to ask Ms. Brock, but Julie Brock, but the idea of some of the barriers and stuff, making sure that everyone's able to participate. The issue of childcare was brought up. I don't know if someone can kind of address that a little bit further, because that is a huge issue for people who are women, own businesses, because of the historical nature of a lot of family dynamics. And so, and then also, this was brought up a while back, and I don't have my words formulated, but there are a lot of barriers where when you go, you're in a very struggling income bracket, and then you get services based on that income bracket. And then if you go right over that income bracket, and so I apologize for not wording this correctly, you lose services. And so it's a huge risk for people too, if they're going to be, getting better jobs to make sure those jobs are sustainable, and then they bring their family out of poverty and without the safety nets that they were relying on because of circumstances. So I don't know if those are two kind of a little bit off, maybe back for the previous presentation, but with childcare, which is a huge crisis here, and it's a huge barrier for women and for a lot of families. And so if you can just touch a little bit on that, I don't want to segue out of your project focus, but those two things I think are concerns that people I've talked to when wanting to get better jobs and wanting to break this system that's been rigged against them for so long, is that they don't know how to do so and make anyway. So are those a couple broken questions that I was hoping could still be addressed during this presentation? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dennis. I can make a quick comment on that, just to note that we have community partners that have worked really well on that. And one of the things I think in the past year through the National League of Cities was some micro grants that were awarded, and one of the focus areas was childcare. And so that's information that I'm happy to share with you after the presentation.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So to this end, when we're thinking about our infrastructure space specifically, we're looking to expand our scope in procurement and take an overview or get an overview of our entire city procurement process. We have decided to join the disparity study, which is usually offered by the state of Minnesota. There are about 22 entities this year that are going to participate. What this does is kind of do deep dive into our whole procurement process in all departments. So not just infrastructure, but other procurement processes. And what they're looking for in that space is, one, to provide us a baseline. What are we doing well? What can we improve? And in this disparity study, they're actually looking to see how well are all community members of different backgrounds, different demographics participating in our procurement process as a city of Rochester. So that could be looking specifically at women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, LGBTQ plus businesses, veterans, et cetera. They then would provide us that overview and baseline, and it would allow us to make a more informed decision if we were to set goals on how we would do that, right? And if there's anything that we're doing well, they would provide us information on all of that. That process takes about 18 months, but we're looking forward to being a part of that. And I will also note, to supplement that, we applied for the City Leadership Procurement Program, and that will allow, if we're selected, 3 teammates to participate through the Kennedy School again and learn a little bit more about procurement. We do have a fairly decentralized process, but understanding what centralizing some of our procurement processes could look like, how we do that most efficiently. But also not only centralizing some of our processes, but how do we make our processes more equitable so more community members can participate in that. So very excited, looking forward to seeing if we get accepted into that, but would be happy to share the results of that disparity study once we have it. The other thing that I'm very excited about is the idea of prototyping community connectors. We've talked a lot about community connection and engagement as one of the goals that we have in the DEI space. Connection to understand what our communities need, and that is very much centered on the idea that our primary role is to offer service to community and make this a great place to live for everyone. What we do note, though, tying back to some of what Jacob talked about, for our limited English proficiency communities, very specifically our Somali-speaking community and our Spanish-speaking community, we have a huge disparity in how they access, connect with, or develop trust with government. A good example of this would be like our Community Connect program that we have through FIRE. It's a little app that you can go in, put in all of your information about your household, who lives there, et cetera. The purpose of that is life-saving. So if fire department is driving over to your house, they can pull up the information, take a look at it, and really understand who's in your household to better help you when they get there. When I had fire pull up that information to see who has filled it out, it was really obvious that we are not having all communities do that. And in asking them questions, recognizing that, one, they might not know what it is, they might not understand the purpose of that particular tool and how it could be useful to their own household, and they may not trust that what we're saying is true. So how can we have community members from that community who have the cultural acuity, who have the language capacity to develop networks and be a liaison with those communities? And the idea is they would share information from departments with the community, but most importantly, they would sit in communities, listen to them, and bring information back to us to inform our practice, to inform our policies, and how we do our everyday work. So we'll be studying this out at a limited capacity, just about 10 hours a week for each of these community connectors. And so we can gather information, learn, understand, bring that back to you. Part of the job description said they would have to come to council and present twice a year on what they're learning and how their work is going. And I will say, for the community members that we shared this job posting with, lots of responses back saying, this is the most wonderful thing that we have seen. We're so excited that you're doing this, even if it's 10 hours a week. And we look forward to seeing what this will mean for our own communities. The next one is Community Building Fund. We talked a lot about economic vitality. We talked a lot about social equity. How do we ensure that small organizations or individuals who are really champions of social equity, who've been doing a lot of this work in our community for a long time, are able to do so, right? And have maybe a stipend or a small fund that allows them to initiate or grow a program that they have. We are building the framework for this. We have the rubric that we will use to evaluate, a team that evaluates these applications. And the idea is to ensure fair and inclusive growth, but that would include things like even events. If a community group or member wants to utilize a certain park or the civic center for an event and they can't afford the insurance, we would like to be able to have this fund to support them in being able to do that. So again, this is something that we're prototyping this year. We would like to see how well it's utilized, kind of curate and lean our process. provide that information back, and then decide how it informs what we do going forward with this funding. Excited to have that launch by the end of the first quarter. And then I always like to share updates from Cultural Humility. This is our ongoing. If you remember, our priorities include professional development specific to DEI. We've started in 2022. We had 150 leaders and supervisors go through this learning. They spent 6 months. We had another 150 teammates participate last year. And Julie alluded to this. Every day we're making decisions about our community, whether we recognize it or not. All of the decisions that we're making, whether it's in policy or service delivery, are based on our own understanding, right? How do we create a process that allows all of our teammates to learn and understand the lives, experiences of other community members that are working and living here? So that is the intention. And you will be seeing something come forward to you again for approval, hopefully, of the next iteration of Cultural Humility. But I thought that it would be really meaningful to share some of the things that teammates said. So at the end of last year, we asked them to provide a reflection or a question at the end of the session. And one of them said, I was excited for this program and open to each month's concepts and theories. While I find myself changed, the real takeaway for me was watching some of my fellow cohorts who appeared against the program at the start begin to change their way of thinking. I believe that cultural humility is important, but I also tend to believe that people don't change. As part of this course, I learned that people can change, and this information energizes me to do more important work every day. The second one that I'd like to share is somebody who was very succinct that said, good service as a city employee should be defined by those we serve. And that was a wonderful reflections, and I have pages and pages of these reflections if you're ever interested in hearing what those are. I can't emphasize enough what it means to have each person start to change their mindset, or at least explore ideas, cultures, ideologies that they might never have before. The second part of a lot of our work here is this transformative equity analysis. It is essentially a justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion analysis that is done. Our organization is large. They usually do one of these for the entire organization, but because we do such different work, it was really important that we did this by department. So I work with each department to kind of prioritize which policies or programs or events they want evaluated from an equity lens. Human Resources agreed, thankfully, to participate in this in 2022, and they reviewed some policies, respecting the workplace harassment as those two, and I'm sorry that repeated there. Out of this equity analysis are recommendations, which is what we need. What do we need to do in this space to be more equitable? This also informs the action plans and the action items so that they can prioritize things that are important. Thankfully, we were able to have 2 departments go through this in 2023, so both the Rochester Public Library and Parks and Rec. You will notice that for both of them, they selected recruitment and retention as something that they wanted to evaluate. How can they better recruit to make sure that the people who are delivering services in their spaces are reflective of the communities that they're serving? Rochester Public Library also requested an environmental scan, so physical space, how they select their books, how those books are displayed in the library, all those kinds of things. How is that inviting, inclusive, and welcoming to the people that they're serving? And for Parks and Rec particularly, most people say they love Rochester because of all of the infrastructure that exists in that park space. How are we engaging community as we continue to grow and develop our spaces and doing that in the best way possible? So again, looking to see that come to you in the next couple of weeks so that we can have an opportunity to have a lot more of these JEDI audits. And then I wanted to share that this hasn't gone away. You are not expected to read this. It's very tiny, but our DI action plans are iterative. We update them every year, highlighting those main 4 areas: the recruitment and retention of diverse teammates, professional development, community connection, engagement, community impact. This is Rochester Police Department's plan, and just capturing one part of that. We ensure that each department is curating their own goals. They have KPIs. They have somebody who's responsible, checking in quarterly to making sure that they're keeping up with those. So that continues to be work that every department is doing. And then all of this is done because we want to create not only an inclusive City of Rochester teammates, but community, right? And it's not inclusion if we invite people into a place that we're unwilling to change. And I would like to believe that as city teammates and as community members, we're willing to learn and change the spaces that we're in. to be more inclusive so that folks can participate. Quick reminder, when I started out 3 years ago, can't believe time has gone by that fast, I shared this, was very aspirational. We've moved on, we're in year 3. I keep going back to this just to note that the work continues. What I would like to highlight in this specific one is community partnerships and action planning. The goal is by 2025 to be able to launch and create a community action plan that is specific to equity and inclusion. To do that, we need partners. So DMC and City of Rochester have worked together to kind of found the Equity Alliance, supported by the McKnight Grant. And we hope to invite other partners throughout this year to participate in that Equity Alliance with us so that we're ready next year to launch that community plan or co-create it with everyone else. So sometimes, every day, and I'm sure like most of you experience, you are dealing with the thing in the moment and you feel like nothing has changed. And I have that moment, I'm sure you all do too. So I wanted to share a little bit about what has changed in the time that I've been here and how different departments have participated in being in that space. We know that transformation is an ongoing process, but we sometimes don't stop to reflect on what that looks like. So I did want to share that, many things have happened. We came up with our first equity and action plan that has changed substantially over time. Today, we launched the municipal ID. If you haven't gotten yours, it's an opportunity to do so at the public library. We have a communications engagement toolkit with a DEI focus, right? So that our project managers, internal city teammates are able to have something to follow, right? When they are engaging with our community. The fire department has had 2 successful years of the Women's Expo and participated in that. That's reflected in their action plan. We are continuing to have professional development throughout. Civic Music, in some of their programming, has introduced CART services, captioning services. We continue to work on the Just Eats program. We were awarded the Global Mayor's Challenge. We are now designated as an inclusive place to work. We had wonderful young professionals join us last year in the intern program and hope to have more join us this year. And those might be future city teammates or decision makers in other capacities, right? We have affinity groups that teammates are able to join so that they can have a sense of belonging and partnership. You've all seen the I Want to Work at RPU that they created, and we can go on and on. RPU has that welcome packet that they now send. And the goal of all of those things and all of those departments continuing to work and doing all the things that we're doing is to make sure that we're building a community for all people all the time. So with that, I know I threw it pretty fast, but I will take any reflections or questions that you might have for me.
Any questions? Mayor?
I'll just say thank you. This has been really exciting to watch unfold over the last few years. And I know it's not just you, it's the whole administration who works on this. I'm thrilled to see so many people going through the trainings and really doing that evaluation we need to look at ourselves to do better. And we're going to keep working and have a community or have a city and a community that everybody can feel welcome, part of, included in, and happy about. So I just want to say thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good presentation, amazing work. It has only been 3 years, but it seems like that's an amazing amount of work to pack in 3 years. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And to the city teammates that support us in all of the work that we do.
Yeah, thank you. So again, long overdue, wonderful things that are being packed and just across the city. So thank you for all the work. This weekend I went to a training from the League of Minnesota Cities on diversity. It was so paradigm shifting. It's a bunch of elected officials all throughout the state of Minnesota. And you could see some people who were really passionate about it. They're taking notes. I'm a note taker too. And then there's some people who are kind of like, well, I was supposed to come here, So you can't, but even the people who weren't thrilled with taking another DEI training walked away with something because there was group discussions, exploring biases that everyone has. And it was just wonderful. So my question is with these teammates, are they volunteer? Are they chosen? Because there is I believe, even though everyone does have the ability to grow and change, there is an intrinsic passion of some, and then some, even on our council, who have never even went to a National League of Cities conference, who don't gravitate toward training or things like that. How are people chosen or do they volunteer? I mean, to find people who have that real wanting to make change, who really care, compassion, empathy at their core, and not doing it because it's a check on the box of, well, every city wants to be DEI, so we're checking off we want to make sure that the right people and the right reasons are being focused on. So a little bit about the
how we
connecting.
make
Thank
that
you.
selection. Thank you for your question, Councilmember
Mhm.
Dennis. The very first year, I thought it was important for all leaders and supervisors to go through it. So I will say, it was everyone who is in a leadership role or supervisory capacity was invited to participate. It wasn't mandatory, but what I will share, it was wonderful to see that they all showed up, right, to participate in that. And then in the following year, I've left it up to departments to decide how they select the next group of people from their department that are going to go through. My understanding that for most department, it is voluntary. We, depending on the size of the department, say RPU is much larger, right? So maybe they get 20 slots for the next one. They work through it on their own and how they designate or choose the next 20 that I've gone through. And I will say, it is okay for people to come in, maybe a little hesitant or maybe apprehensive, because the intention of the professional development is to transform, right? Is to change, to hear, right? And learn different perspectives. So it has been good to see a good blend, and beyond the learning that they get in this DI space, it's also an opportunity for them to work with teammates from other departments that they haven't had an opportunity to. So departments get to make that selection on their own.
That's because it does take creative and courageous conversations. As an advantaged white woman, I mean, I see the wrong things. I know because I don't have that lived experience, but there are, I think to be really curious and want to learn and want to hear stories and change, really hard to force onto people that aren't, wanting to, attend. So I just thank you for making it more of a, individual, like people can have more say in who participates. So thank you so much.
Yep. And I will add, I mean, I think for city teammates, the question we always ask them is, why did you select public service? And it's because they have a heart to serve the community that they are living in. And we all understand and believe that the community is everyone. So how do we make sure that we're learning and having the tools to be able to serve everyone that lives in our community?
All right.
Thank you.
So much. Actually, before we move on to the next topic, let's just take a quick 4 or 5 minute break. Let's reconvene at like 4:50, 4:55. Sure. Yep. Sorry for those in the audience, but.
Recording stopped.
From the last time. So.
Recording in progress.
After 5, so why don't we pick up where we left off and we need to start the next part of the session here, and I will, Irene, take over and regale us with her presentation.
Thank you, council members, council president. Josh Johnson and I will be doing this presentation together. We are going to be talking about economic development incentives for housing. This is kind of a continuation. We started discussing some of the different things with the economic vitality presentation back in January. And at that time, we said we were going to come back and really look at some of the incentives for housing and what does that look like. And during this time period, we've also continued to get feedback from developers and builders and the community on what some of those needs are. And one of the things that we wanted to really start with is that we're looking at all different types of housing, whether it be market rate, affordable units. We know that there's a need for units across the board. It's not looking at just either or, it's looking at all of them. Increasing the supply of housing is going to help across the board, and really looking at the different types that are available and how do we really help drive that as we kind of continue moving forward. So really we want to focus on all types of housing and just really increasing the overall supply of housing units within Rochester. We know that there are shortfalls. We had this slide when we were talking about economic vitality, and there's the need for 5,628 market for sale homes by 2030, that our current production rates are not meeting that demand, and that we're estimated to need 964 sale homes. In case that came from the Rochester Area Housing Financial and Policy Tool Forecasting Analysis that was done last year, and that's where that 960 came from. Generally, our goal is approximately 500 units a year, and we've only been around the 200, 250, so that's where that 950 comes from. There's a demand for multifamily housing units in the downtown of about 3,000 units, and there's demand for senior housing. So across the board, we're seeing that there is a need for housing units and how we best kind of move that forward. When we're looking at existing financial tools, we use our community development block grant funding for where we can in terms of supporting housing initiatives. We have tax increment financing, which we're going to talk a bit more about today. Our state-led hazard remediation program, our ADU pilot program, 4D, and our city parcel disposition. All of these are tools that we have existing that kind of help contribute to the overall housing. And really, what does that look like? And one of the ones that we are going to be adding to it is economic vitality will be another tool, obviously, later this year when the sales tax starts collecting for that we will add to this. The other key component is really the regulatory tools that we have available, and this really sets that first things that we need to address and really helps all these pull together, and all of these work together in terms of our comprehensive plan and setting that larger vision for the city of Rochester, and then really using the tool, which is the Unified Development Code, to how do we implement that comprehensive plan moving forward. And then the sanitary sewer master plan of like where we're seeing this growth and how we need to have those infrastructure improvements going forward, and how does that get incorporated with the other documents that we have. And then our other maps and policies in terms of our growth management map and our land use map, and all of those really help guide discussions in terms of development, where we're going to see growth and where those needs to be managed going forward. So what are the policy considerations that before you today that we're looking for some feedback on tools to support the creation of single family and multifamily housing units. We really want to create this environment to support the development of housing units within Rochester. And that's really what we're looking to do. And also we're looking at how do we layer these tools and how do we pull these together to successfully help drive additional housing units. So some of the conditions and challenges that we're seeing for residential development, I think these are pretty well known across the board, but we're seeing dramatic rise in borrowing costs due to interest rates, the rise in construction costs post-COVID. Operating costs are also rising, trying to find willing developers who are interested in doing development, managing funding requirements that are, what are the requirements depending on the funding source that need to be included in that project, and what does that do to the overall project numbers? And then being able to finance projects and looking at how those other factors all come together, which makes for some challenging for builders and developers to really put this forward in terms of building additional units and entering the market right now. What we're seeing, and wanted to provide an example, is if we had a project that, started construction in May of 22, and what it would happen if that started today, and what you see is an increase in the gap of that project of over $2.45 million. So you're seeing increase in the per unit that would need to be, and how that developer, if this project was there and ready to go and had it delayed a little bit based on all of these other factors, this is where we're seeing the costs go up in terms of the borrowing costs, the interest rates, and all of those other factors in terms of producing these types of projects. So we really wanted to give you that example, and you can kind of see where that goes in terms of where our current TIF policy is and where we're seeing those borrowing construction costs. And overall, like, where does that lie where we are right now? And so with all of this information, we kind of have a little bit of a two paths going forward. We either kind of wait for the market to shift, or we start creating some flexibility and start looking at what we have in terms of policies and tools to help support and grow housing. And so really what we're looking to do is, what changes can we make to kind of continue to push housing and make that a priority? Because we think waiting for the market isn't going to be the best solution for Rochester, knowing all the growth that's going to be coming forward. So in terms of what we've done recently with regulatory tools, and this is just something that we wanted to highlight, is with the updated UDC, we reduced minimum lot size, we diversified the housing types across the citywide. We kind of created a predictable process so that when somebody's coming in, it's very easy to see what that process is and how they move forward through it. We've also done a lot of process improvements internally to make sure that we are tracking review times and being able to share that information so that people know when those things are going to come forward. We've updated technology when we need to, and also really focused on meeting with people up front, trying to get them the information through pre-development, and also our weekly development review committee of getting feedback to people early so that they kind of know what there might be going on with that project. And
Thanks, Irene. I'm going to talk about some of our more commonly used development assistance tools. Before that, just want to talk a little bit about the benefits of economic density and housing development. So one of the things that I know is kind of a scary word, it can be a scary word, is the word density. I really don't want it to mean like 18-story housing complexes. This really means just more units per acre than maybe your typical greenfield single family development. The other thing is we think about density being downtown, and of course that's our highest, densely populated area, but it can be outside of downtown as well. You think about our development of the West Transit Village, other transit-oriented development sites. But some of the benefits to density is clustering around other property types like retail, neighborhood services, other commercial uses. So these are just some of the other examples of the benefits of density. So walkability, it's been proven that, people experience emotional and physical health the more they walk. It also reduces, the reliance on single occupied vehicles or vehicles in general. And that sort of leads us to transit opportunities. So the more densely populated an area, the more transit opportunities are often available. It also helps us direct where our future transit investments are going to be in the more denser areas. It also supports sustainability. That can be counterintuitive. But a lot of times these are infill sites. You can design projects that have green roofs. They have sustainable heating and cooling systems. They could even connect to future district energy systems. Local economic impact, of course, density equals more rooftops per se, more people living under one roof. So retail follows rooftops, that spurs economic development. A lot of retail businesses and other commercial businesses will look at walk sheds, where our employee and customer base can be walking to and from. Efficient land use, as I mentioned, a lot of times these are infill sites. So we typically already have streets, we have sewers, we have water right in front of the project already. So we're not extending our capacity or extending our infrastructure. And then better use of city resources, that's more of the same. I actually reverse those. So efficient land use is more about having more bang for your buck, more yield per acre, because you've got more housing, more value, which increases sales tax, property tax, and those types of things. Better use of resources is really the benefit of having the infrastructure already there. And then there's the development impacts, the different phases of going through development. So the first phase is really the jobs, the wages, the impact fees, the permit fees that come along with developing a project. The ripple effect there, the phase two, is the people that are receiving those fees, the people that are reviewing the permits, people that are building the project now have more money in their pockets than they go out and spend locally. The ongoing impact is the people now that live in those housing units that go work out in the workforce locally, they typically spend about 3/5 of their income on local goods and services. And then the reinforcing loop is once you develop maybe a blighted area or develop a service parking lot, you're making that area more attractive, which develops or spurs more economic development. The other thing that I didn't mention about density is the statistic that downtown residents are likely to spend 7 times more in 1 year in downtown neighborhoods than a downtown employee. So we often think about, attracting visitors, which is important, but creating that critical mass of people that live in denser populated areas is also very, very important. Some of the future regulatory tools that we're looking at is pre-reviewed ADU plans. And I'm, being specific there. So pre-reviewed is different than pre-approved. So pre-reviewed, we're working with the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing as the ADU pilot program, where we have pre-reviewed plans that we can actually present or to provide to people that are interested in developing ADUs. And that really creates, an opportunity to get people off the ground and running a little bit. There's a little bit of uh, um, you know, local mom and pops might not know like how to develop an ADU, right? So this just gives them an opportunity to have a plan in place that's pre-reviewed. It saves time. We estimate that it's about $6,000 to $10,000 in design fees by having those plans already available. The other thing I would mention is it's not a development assistance tool that we often think about, but one of the biggest impacts that we can give to any developer, not just ADUs, but in general, is the benefit of time. So the more expedited we can make our review processes, the more transparent we can make those processes, the more time it saves. And time does equal money when you're talking about developers investing in the city of Rochester. Once we test this pilot program, we'll also look at expanding the pre-approved housing plans to duplexes and small apartment buildings to see how that works with our permit review team. Now we're going to go into just some of the financial tools that are most commonly used to incentivize housing. So this is just a comparison of abatement versus TIF. So the one thing that I want to note is through a lot of these incentives that we're looking at, we're really looking at a layered approach. How do we layer the different funding strategies to get the most bang for our buck? In this case, TIF and tax abatement cannot coexist. It's either one or the other. You can't have a TIF district and an abatement district that overlap. So just going through some of the differences, what is it? So TIF allows financing based on the future tax increment. Taxpayers still pay the full tax amount and then get reimbursed and agreed upon percentage of the increment that's generated. And I'll go into that a little bit more deeply. Tax abatement is taking the local taxing jurisdiction's percentage of the property taxes and then either providing that to the owner for economic or public benefit and public improvements, or the city can retain that for public infrastructure and public improvements. So it's either 100% or something less to that. The term limit for TIF is 25 years. It actually ends up being more like 26 years because you can not capture the first year, which adds another year, but statutorily it shows 25 years. Tax abatement, it's typically 15 years. So the city can choose to create a 15-year tax abatement. If the city has the county and the school district also vote and wants to be a part of the abatement, it can extend out to 20 years. The incentive amount for TIF is based on the increment that's generated, and there's a slide that will show that in a little bit more detail. And there's typically much higher financial incentive potential with TIF than in abatement. The annual value of abatement can't exceed 10% of the political subdivision's net tax capacity. So there is a limit when we're looking at how much abatement goes out, and that includes abatement bonds as well. That's still a very, very large number because we have a very, very large net tax capacity, and we're currently not even close to that. The pros of TIF, so TIF requires approval by only one municipality, so the city can collect all of the increment generated from a project, both county, school district, and city taxes. For TIF, regulations and increments for abatement are a lot less onerous than TIF, so the funding that you receive from the abatement is much more flexible in terms of how you use it. The cons to TIF are they're subject to more legal restrictions. There's the blight test, there's the but-for findings and stricter limits where that money can be spent. And then abatement, as I mentioned, just requires each taxing district's approval, depending on how much you want to capture and the year amount that you want to extend it to. So on the left-hand side, this is a lot of what I just said. So, the 2023 net tax capacity is 195 million. So if we can only capture 10% of that, it's still a large portion. One of the strategies that we're looking at is what does abatement look like for a single family home? So if we were to take a single family home over a 3-year period and we were to provide the benefit or the abatement generated off that over 3 years, it could be to go towards the increase in taxes once a family moves in, or it could be to help assist with the down payment for a home. So for the down payment portion, you need to have another fund to sort of front load that and then replenish it over the 3 years in order to give them an upfront benefit because you're capturing that abatement over time. But just give you some visualization of what that might mean in terms of dollar amount. So a $276,000 home would generate about $7,500 in abatement funds over a 3-year period. And then you could extend all the way up to 300, well, you can go as high as you want technically, but I think the goal here is to make it affordable. So $500 home would account for about a little over $10,000 in abatement value. So this is just a visual, an infographic that shows how TIF works. So a lot of people think that once you make a TIF project, you're taking taxes out of the general fund. That's not true. You're actually taking the existing tax base that already is there and freezing it at the time that the district's established. So you're already still accounting for all of those tax dollars that were existing on the site. And then there's the but-for test. So but for the TIF assistance, this project wouldn't happen. So if you weren't to provide TIF, the test is it wouldn't materialize anyway, so you'd be stuck with that existing tax base. But what TIF does is over time, as the property value increases, you can capture that incremental tax. So from the frozen amount to the construction, when it's constructed, and then as the value raises, you're capturing that increment. You capture it over a period of time that's determined through the development assistance agreement. It's anywhere between 1 year and 25 years for a redevelopment or a housing district. And then once the TIF district is decertified, then all of that tax then goes back into the general fund, or the taxes captured. There's also a video we did a couple years ago that just goes over the basics, and there's a link right there if you're interested in watching a short 3-minute video.
A question on,
Yeah.
and my understanding on single family homes, the TIF is not a but-for. Are you talking commercial, or are you talking residential single family lots?
So let's go right here. So 2 of the most standard TIF types are redevelopment TIFs or housing TIFs. There's actually more, there's more TIF legislative projects that you can go through, but the most commonly used are redevelopment and housing. So for housing, a blight test is not required.
Okay, and they're
Yep.
at 115% of income level. So if you go back to your abatement, how does that help supply? You're talking helping with down payment assistance. There's lots of programs to do that. We don't really have we have a lot of need, but we don't have much supply. So how does that help supply?
Well, TIF helps, well,
No, abatement.
yeah,
Abatement. How does
okay.
it help supply?
Good
And I
question,
can jump
Irene.
in. I'm a big fan of the abatement idea. So I'll offer this up. Really, you're really trying to encourage the consumer to make the most significant investment that most people have, which is their home, right? And, many people are challenged at the time of purchase with either coming up with a down payment, there's significant expenses that they might have that are extraordinary. And so whether you do it over time, as the abatement comes in and you rebate that back to the taxpayers, they can reinvest that in their landscaping in their yard and their finishing out the basement, or if they need it on the front end in order to, get qualified for the type of home that they, want to purchase and the mortgage that they need. It really just helps out with a lot of the cash issues that people see. Now, this isn't an affordable idea. This is for all units. So I think just that's maybe an important distinction. A lot of times when you talk about a program, you're talking about trying to tie it to certain affordability levels. If you did, the more common approaches on these abatements, whether they're 2 or 3 year, city only, county only, really is to encourage production. You've seen that. I've seen that be successful in other communities. Um, and it really just tries to create demand, for houses being constructed and development on the consumer side. There's other things I think the group will talk about tonight that are, helping on the development side, whether it's carrying costs of platted lots or things like that. But it really does try to create that opportunity and really, talk about a units first approach to housing. Because if whatever house I would maybe go build, the house I'm in currently is then going to become available. So there's this filtering effect that happens. And so as people, get to different points in their life, or you build a more expensive home, you might be moving out of a less expensive home, and then it creates that opportunity through filtering, to create better single family owner occupied opportunities. I think it's important to know too, when you're talking about abatement, you're really talking about owner occupied opportunities, not just a traditional single family home. Could be, in a townhouse environment or things like that. But these programs in Minnesota have been successful. And, it's something we can try. You don't have to try it forever. But it is something that, really gets to that. How can we encourage production? Because you need production to make progress on this. You're not going to be able to incentivize through the handful of affordable housing opportunities, at $100,000 a unit and work your way out of this problem. So it's an opportunity in that space.
Okay.
Just for clarification, so just to understand, so you said abatement doesn't help with the front end cost, but it does help with it? Because that, I see that the barrier when people are renting is they need this down payment. I mean, to even, so does abatement help with the down payment? That's a huge amount of money and a huge barrier for people to step out of the renter's world.
Yeah, if the council so chooses to, like I said, oops, you'd have to front load out of some other fund in order to get the abatement generated over a couple year period in order to then provide upfront assistance, but it's possible. It's legally possible.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right. So this is just talking about, so a lot of times when we talk to developers and, just internally, there is some confusion about how like a standard TIF project works versus like a DMC TIF that was provided to us through statute. I won't spend a lot of time, but they're both city TIF projects. The only difference is in terms of the approval is that it's the both say yes model. So they do have to go through the DMCC board for approval as well as the city council for approval. But they're still city taxes. It's still a city TIF district. It just, in order to access that portion of the, legislative approval, we have to have that both say yes. So a couple of things that can impact redevelopment project is the blight test. So that's that that's a blight test. It's got to have deficient facilities on it. It must be occupied by 70% of the area, and the district must be occupied by buildings, streets, utilities, or other structures. So like a vacant lot wouldn't work for a redevelopment district. So a lot of times we have people come in, we have quite a few vacant lots around the city. They would not be able to meet the blight test. So then therefore it would eliminate the availability for them to tap into the redevelopment TIF project. A DMC TIF project does not require a blight study. So that's not in the picture. You can develop a vacant lot and still utilize DMC TIF. There's also something that we've ran into is the early demolition agreement. So a lot of times people will want to demolish a dilapidated building and do it before they're ready to create a TIF district. We can do a blight analysis, an early demolition agreement, but then there's a 3-year clock by the time they demo the building to when they have to have a TIF district established. And as we've seen, when the market turns and conditions are difficult, they can run into that clock. because there's no blight analysis required for DMC TIF, that's not a requirement. Both durations of a standard TIF and a DMC TIF are 25 years for a redevelopment district. And then the pooling requirements. So for a standard TIF, there are quite a few restrictions on the amount of increment that you can capture, how long after you decertified the district that you can utilize it, and where that pooling amount can be spent. DMC is much more liberal, where a lot of times, and one thing I'll also mention is a TIF district is the actual property that you're getting increment from. Then there's project area that might not be you're not collecting all increment on all those properties, but it's larger. So the reason why I say that is a DMC TIF district might be the brick, which is the property, but we create a project area, which is the entire boundary of DMC, if that makes sense. Housing, as Councilmember Palmer mentioned, there's no blight test requirement for housing, which makes it a little bit more approachable. However, there are income limits for rental properties, which is the 2050 test. So 20 of the units must be at 50% or less of area median income. And then the 40-60 test, which is 40% of the units are at 60% or less of AMI. For owner occupied properties, as Palmer mentioned, is the first buyer needs to be either 100% AMI or under for 2 or less persons, or 115% and under AMI for 3 or more persons. DMC, none of that's required. So you can have, like the brick property that I mentioned, that is a workforce housing project. So we were able to provide TIF at workforce housing or 80% of AMI, where that wouldn't have been eligible with a standard TIF project. The other 2 requirements are similar to the redevelopment districts. TIF for single family. So this is something that we used to do from 1999 to 2005. We used it for 379 single family owner occupied units. The amount of assistance was $10,000 per home, and that was reimbursed when the homeowner or when the home builder sold it to an income eligible homeowner. We have found that some of our requirements, like prevailing wage for single family specifically, can create 10 to 15% more costs in construction and development than not having that requirement in place. It is higher for multifamily units. For construction and development, we're looking at probably 20 or more percent. So prevailing wage requirements, from what we've heard from our developer community, is it does make an impact when we're trying to develop or build affordable housing or housing in general. This is just a comparison of our TIF policy versus other communities. So the objective of this slide is just to show that our TIF policy is a little bit more prescriptive than we've seen in other communities around Minnesota for the TIF policy. We have a priority section. We also have a provision section, and then we have a requirement section. And each of those sections have some very specific type of requirements that you must meet in order to, not must, but that we recommend that you meet in order to receive development assistance from the city. So one of those is 10 years of increment for housing projects, that no more than 70%, 75% of increment is actually for like a redevelopment district. We also require prevailing wage and WMB. And then for housing, we require that 12,000 or you must not exceed 12,000 per dwelling unit or 15 years. We have not seen that in other communities. So I think when the market is in balance, having very clear expectations and having very clear priorities to let developers know that if you're going to be asking for assistance, makes sense. When we're in a challenging market and we're experiencing the interest rates and labor market and supply shortage, I think that having a little bit more leniency creates more creativity with the teammate. Also makes us a little bit more responsive to what the market's telling us. So as Mr. Parrish mentioned, we're maybe not recommending this for the next 20 years, but as the market is, as it is currently, maybe we test some different policies and see how it works over the next 2 or 3 years, or however often you want us to bring back the TIF policy. I'm gonna hand it off to Irene.
So the next thing that we wanted to kind of talk about is the 4D1, the property tax tax classification rate. There have been some changes to this program where the tax classification rates change from 0.75% to 0.25%, which is pretty significant when looking at some of these. And really and a lot of these were done in the 2023 legislative session. The property tax savings has to be used for either property maintenance, property security, improvements to the property, rent stabilization, or increases to the property's reserve account. So those savings, they are only for the designated units. So if you had a mixed income building, it would only be for the affordable designated units that would receive the tax cut, the tax savings on those. Everything else would be taxed at the regular market rate. And so it's only those units. And there's two ways to receive 4D program. The first way, there is a program through Rochester and Olmsted County that is administered by Olmsted County HRA staff, looking at multifamily properties with 4 or more units. There are rent limits that you can see, whether they be standard rents for the Housing Choice Voucher Program and also have to agree to accept Housing Choice vouchers. Rent increases are capped at 6% annually, and there's a 10-year affordability period. The other option that is out there that has some is the Minnesota Housing also offers a 41 program, and where at least 20% of the total housing units must meet one of those following: the rent and income restrictions at below 60% AMI, the rental assistance, low-income housing tax credits, and the project-based Section 8. We do have a lot of projects because if they do receive low-income housing tax credits, they can easily go into this program. But we have had several projects that have received development assistance, have received TIF funding, and may have said, we're going to limit the amount for workforce housing, but we don't include rents in those development assistance agreements, which is a requirement of participating in the program. So that is one thing that would need to be included as we kind of move forward, is if there's a willingness to include and look at some of those. So you could use the 4D program with a TIF, so you could layer these incentives together. So what we're kind of looking at in terms of proposed changes to existing programs is looking at the tax increment financing, the 4D program, and then we also included the city parcel disposition. We didn't really talk in too much detail, but really looking at, is there a way, if we do have city parcels going forward, and whether perhaps deferring the sale price, if there's a significant sale price that's beyond $1, could we work and have some creativity and maybe deferring that given the current market right now? And I think that would be done on a case-by-case basis, but wanted to kind of put that out as something else that we're kind of looking at as an opportunity to help incentivize housing. So we have a couple of recommendations that we've put forth. Really waive the provision for prevailing wage for single-family TIF projects. Just to kind of look at that, we know that it's increasing the cost, and it doesn't become so much of an incentive with those costs there. Really allow some flexibility within the TIF policy for the next 24 months to respond to market conditions. As you saw and Josh kind of went through, we have a lot more provisions within our existing TIF policy than what state statute requires. So how can we make some adjustments and really respond and be able to get a little bit more creative in layering these incentives? Look to support a 3-year abatement program for homeowners. This could be a pilot program. Looking at a couple years, we could come back and see what's working, but that's really to incentivize homeowners to participate and get into an owner-occupied unit. And then support existing housing projects with the 4D program. We do have a couple of projects that have some TIF agreements and existing development assistance agreements that don't have rents included. And so is there an opportunity there to kind of add that into the language of that agreement and also establish an affordability period of 15 years for those units. So our next steps would be to amend the TIF policy and bring back to City Council based on the feedback, and also look to develop an abatement program going forward. And with that, I will open it up for questions and discussion.
I got a couple for you. You said our parcels that we own, so where are we at with Homestead Trails? Is that going to be sold and houses built this year?
We were finalizing the development agreement and getting that finalized, and then that will come back before City Council for approval for that to move forward.
Okay, I agree with you on the residential TIF policy, but I think 24 months, if you are planning on doing a division, a subdivision, it would take 36 to 48. I mean, would be a better incentive to me. I don't know why we'd want to artificially leave it at 24. I do understand why you want to come back and revisit it. in part of our process that we're talking about, in the next presentation, you have in there the, planning to succeed. We're at 36% of the goal for, 2040 for multifamily. We're only at 17% for single family dwelling, and that's where people build wealth. So how do you think this is going to help get us to that 960 single family dwellings? I mean, last year we did 211. So how is this plan gonna really move this along?
I think what we're looking at is how do we start building and creating flexibility within our existing incentive programs? And how do we start layering these, not only what we're talking about tonight, but how do we incorporate some of the programming within economic vitality to really help build and create the environment for additional development to take place? We are not obviously going to be building any of those homes, but we need to create the environment and work with our partners on what helps move that along in terms of getting projects moving forward. And so part of what we've been having discussions with is if we open up some of our TIF policies, create some flexibility, how do we start producing additional units?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to gear back to the original. I just did my math, and for a $300,000 home on 20% down payment, 60,000, and you have this incredible amount of money, who people are struggling to stay in their homes right now to find $60,000 for a down payment on a $30,000 home is just, just astronomic feats. And so to try to help residents get out of the renting cycle and into exactly what Councilmember Palmer was talking about, developing wealth in a home investment, I think also should be a big priority. Looking at, I brought this up a couple meetings ago, looking into how St. Paul has done rent-controlled ordinances, stabilization. And I guess I haven't done a lot of research. I wanted to kind of get ideas from city staff as well, because to address housing means to build more housing, and exactly what you're doing, using all the tools we have to see what developers want and what we can offer with, of course, looking at being good stewards of taxpayer dollars and making sure that it's a win-win for everyone. But it also is to prevent homelessness. And when, like I had mentioned before, you have $5 billion coming into our city with high-paying jobs. Yeah, the school teachers and the frontline workers and a lot of people will be struggling to keep in their homes with the rent prices and housing prices going up. So has that been looked at for Rochester? I can't remember the exact answer if that is something that we have looked at for ordinances or council have proposed to stabilize rent, to put a cap on the amount of percentage rents can go up to just ensure that when people do find a place renting, saving up for their $60,000, I mean, I don't know, I don't have anything close to that in my savings, but they don't lose their home, because you can't save for a down payment and have your rent continuously go up. So anyway, long question, but has that been considered in Rochester? Thank you.
If I might just respond to that, and then of course let Community Development Director Woodward supplement my answer. I would thank you for the question. I think, as we indicated the last time, our approach to this recommendation, our approach to this work has been first fix the regulations, which we've spent a number of years doing, and now looking at what are the incentives that we can do and create more flexible incentives to respond to a challenging market and not lose in this game of creating housing to other communities who have much more flexible incentive tools. We have not looked at what might be construed as a punitive approach to it by putting things like rental controls in place. If that is something that the council would like us to explore, that would require a council initiated action. At this point, our focus has been on clean up the regulatory language, make it easy, consistent, reliable, predictable for neighbors and developers so they know what they're getting, and then create a more competitive incentive environment that Rochester can work in for the next, as Community Development Director Woodward and Strategic Initiatives Director Johnson have indicated for the next couple of years to just see what kind of movement we're making in creating units and creating product that then frees up more units in the market that starts to deal with some of the tensions that we see in terms of pricing, whether it's homeownership or rental. But if there is the desire for us to look at a rental control environment, we would need to get some clarification and direction through a council initiated action.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm looking into that. So thank you. Yeah, I didn't consider it. It is for like a punitive approach. I see it as a protection for people who are struggling paycheck to paycheck, so they don't lose their
Well,
place.
and I would also just note that if someone is participating in the 4D program to receive that tax, kind of reduced tax rate, they're also capping their rents and incomes. So they have restrictions that if they're participating in that program, there is some of that built into it. And that's part of what we need to look at with some of our existing, if there's projects coming in. And I think it goes to kind of like how we layer these different incentives to help produce and increase the overall supply, which I think will also help reduce the impact of the rents going up because there's this supply demand issue that we're seeing.
Yeah, I know, it is so complex, so I appreciate all the work, and I know it's a crisis, so we need to look at all options and what you've presented. We have a lot of experience on council, but expert experience with the staff. The other question is, because it's so confusing, and I have spent time talking to people about TIF and trying to understand it, it's very confusing. Are there staff who sit down with residents, people, developers, as a kind of mentoring program, letting them know about all these options, explaining? I know it's very time consuming, and I have mentioned before, maybe like you put a video on, that's great, but on explaining things. But this is to get this information in the hands and understood by people who, don't have the time other than to work multiple jobs to make ends meet, it's really hard. So long question, what is being done to really help people understand the options and then get feedback? Because to get feedback from us is one thing, because we're not in the field developing. I think the feedback really needs to come from the people who are utilizing programs and the people who are developing and thinking about should I build a huge community of housing and here in Rochester, what do they want with all of this?
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. So we do meet whenever we have a request or someone just wants to talk about like how the TIP projects work or want to talk about a potential development. So we do meet. So we'll either set up a one-off meeting to discuss. We'll often bring in community development, Irene, Brent Svenby, Ryan Yetzer, just to go through holistically, not only just how TIF works, but how does development process works. We also have a standing Monday meeting with our DMC colleagues. So if developers reach out to us, we'll bring them into those development meetings, and then we'll have DMC teammates there, we'll have city teammates there, and then we can describe how all the processes work. We also have a TIF attorney so that when we need to draft language and actually review legal documents, that person specializes in it because it is very, very complex. So they do all of our development assistance agreement, and if we have questions, we'll refer to her.
Thank you.
Thank you. Quite on the other end of the housing spectrum, do we have models of comparable Minnesota cities, maybe a Rosemount or a Woodbury, where they've used tools like this and it has spurred significant housing construction?
I think everybody is kind of looking at their tools right now. I think what we're seeing with our TIF policy is that there's a level of restriction. So how do we kind of create that flexibility to help spur additional? I think especially what's important is kind of layering these incentives so that I think there's an opportunity there to kind of help and test out things and be able to see what's working and not working. But I think that TIF in general throughout Minnesota is working. I think it's just how we kind of bring it to the different projects.
Did I take from what you said that we're a little bit behind or different in TIF?
I think we've set some additional restrictions beyond what the state statute requires. So there are some limiting factors. So that has made some of the projects a little bit more challenging. And so what we're seeing now, given the market, is the need to be more flexible.
And some of that would spur more interest in development, in our opinion.
Yes, I mean, we're seeing additional gaps we were kind of trying to show with some of the projects. We're seeing significant gaps growing on various projects. And so it's either do we make adjustments now to kind of be able to get that project started and moving? Or are we going to have to wait for the market to kind of adapt with our existing TIF policy? And so that could push out that start time, which means those units won't be available for potentially another 2 years, whenever that hits that right point in the market.
No, and I've heard a criticism that we shouldn't have special programs for special times because that benefits a small group of people. But the fact is, that's always been the case on timing for home buying. For instance, 4 and 5 years ago, when rates were down to 1 and 2%, the people who bought then got a certain advantage that people are not enjoying now. So that we can respond to markets and do something to, as Palmer keeps saying, try and increase our inventory somehow. Boy, we've got to respond to 2024. Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, she hasn't asked you.
You can go first if you're first, that's fine.
A couple things that I know, and it goes back to supply and demand. On the demand side, the state of Minnesota and a lot of nonprofits have programs for down payment assistance. Where the problem is, if I can have down payment assistance, I have no house to build or no house to buy. So for me, that's where our supply issue is where we're at with that. And I would just comment on, Rochester is really fortunate. We have the Rochester Coalition. We have Olmsted County working on this. We have the city of Rochester working on it. We have a phenomenally great staff that have done really good work on trying to do some new incentives on this. And so I think that we're right there. And as Mr. Wall said, supply is a big issue and we need to help out. If you want people to work in downtown Rochester or work at a grocery store, they're going to have a house to have. And I'll just comment on rent control. I don't know where it works. I would not be for rent control. So it would have to be a CIA. I hope to get any work from the staff on that. So thank you.
Thanks. On slide 24, I believe it's the top bullet point. It says waive provisions for prevailing wages from single family TIF. I saw it on slide 24. Thank you for putting numbers on your slides, by the way. Yeah, so when I read that first blue line, doesn't that completely contradict the equity in the built environment that we just learned about earlier?
So with the prevailing wage, it's different contractors and needs in terms of what that pricing. So we talked to a number of builders and developers in terms of what that looks like for them and how that increases their cost 10 to 15%. And it doesn't necessarily change the people, the entry level. So we don't have some of that. So it actually makes it more accessible for people to build homes right now if we don't have that prevailing wage requirement. Generally, you're not going to get those contractors to bid on those single family homes and building. You're seeing it in the market rate, the multi-family, but not necessarily in the single family. So right now, we're not seeing the incentive to make that unit more affordable. We're seeing that people might choose not to participate in a TIF program and be able to build additional units because the cost is the increasing of that cost.
Okay, that makes sense. I understand that. I just see it as choosing one thing over here to compromise another, or you choose this over here and this compromises. I see them being somewhat contradictory. And then also on the ADU comment, how many have been pre-reviewed already since we authorized that incentivizing of those with our programming last year?
I think we have 2 that are complete, and I'll have to check some. And then the pre-review, we're still finalizing that process, but we have, I believe, 2.
Okay, I
units.
think the incentives were for up to 20.
We didn't quite
80 to
have
10?
that much funding for,
Okay, all right.
but I think it was, let's see if, I was gonna check and see if, check the numbers. I can get back to you with an update.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one comment on Councilmember Kirkpatrick. I agree that prevailing wage, we need to make sure I am a huge supporter because we need to make sure we don't have, people who are working at poverty wages and fostering the poverty system to make homes to, we can do better. There's other options than to create bad jobs. We need to keep livable wage and prevailing wage so that people can, who are building the homes, can afford the homes that they built. So I would not be in support at all of minimizing that program. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to take a little bit of a jog toward supply and just throw this out there. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we're sort of short, but just to plant the seed of, and I'm sorry, I was actually doing research as I was asked, trying to get ready to ask this question. That is single family home rentals and VRBOs. We're converting a lot of houses into, and it's particularly in parts of Falwell and Kutzke Park, and I assume Slatterly Park as well, which is, it's a difficult thing because people buy homes, they have a right to do what they want with them, their income properties, yet they're also taking a lot of inventory off the shelf. And I know that there was some legislation about a year ago in Minneapolis trying to restrict that. I don't know where that went. I couldn't follow the thread because I was trying to pay attention, but I think it's an incredibly interesting thing to think about in terms of freeing up houses that people can purchase by considering how many rentals and VRBOs we're allowing per square acre or whatever. And I'm not suggesting we do that, but it really does affect supply. And in some parts of near where I live and other areas in the St. Mary's Gateway, there are a lot of houses becoming income properties. And I don't know how we solve that problem. If we can solve that problem, we live in a capitalist society, but we have to be really cognizant of that going too far. Because what we're going to see is a sea of rentals and VRBOs. And I wouldn't like to see that happen. So just putting it out there.
I just want to comment on that because I believe last year, I think it was me who asked about that, wondering if we could do certain areas or census tracts, homes 300,000 or less or 350,000 or less. And I believe it was Ms. Zelms calling you out. I apologize. Saying that we couldn't perhaps do it with certain census tracts, but we could look at a way to do it through zoning or some other way. Do you remember this conversation that we had? And how has that progressed? Has that gone anywhere in looking at that? Or is that something that the council needs to approach and give to staff to look at?
Councilmember, everyone else, I think if we have some clarity that's something the council wants us to look at, we will need to be threading the needle, making sure that what we do doesn't violate any HUD requirements. And we would want to be cautious that if someone, is already, purchased a home in order to do that, you don't want to be seen as a taking of their property. So there are a number of legal things, probably far more than I've just mentioned, that Mr. Spendler Craig is thinking of. But there are communities that do have some requirements. There are also some communities that invest more in tracking where the BRB, where the short-term rentals are occurring. Of course, we have our rental program. But there are ways to track where there's significant activity occurring and making sure that if you're renting for less than 30 days, that's arguably a lodging tax. So there are ways to look at that, but it can be really challenging. Probably the way that I have seen most recently, it has not been challenged, but that doesn't mean it won't be challenged. It was in a university community where there was a certain percentage per area. I believe it was per block and only in certain areas of the city. And I don't know if the only in certain areas is riskier than.
If I could just add to what City Administrator Zelms has indicated, there has been some court challenge related to restriction of neighborhoods or areas. And so that kind of stopped a lot of city, and it's recent, it's within the last couple of years, it has stopped cities from advancing and trying to control Airbnb and short-term rental in that capacity. We do know that there is language at the state level related to Airbnbs specifically is related to corporate ownership of that, but we can get an update on where that is at. So.
That would be great. That's really all I'm asking about is, what might an hour study session bring to us? And, what would we learn with something like that? That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to clarify something on the TIF for residential. I've been in the residential business for over 40 years, and we had 5 projects in Rochester with TIF in the 90s that did not have prevailing wage. If the people who are working in our single family dwelling are making a good wage, it's not a bare minimum wage. It's a good wage that they're making. The problem that you have is that if you have TIF projects in for single family, they have prevailing wage, you will not have anybody working them because we do not have single family builders who have union wages. And also the paperwork that's included to do that is it will prevent a lot of people from using it. So if you have prevailing wage with single family TIF projects, you will not have any single family projects built because they just aren't available. The workers aren't there. This is an excellent job for people to enter working in the construction industry, to get into the single family dwelling business. They can be a carpenter, they can be a plumber, they can learn, and then they can move on if they want to, or own their own company. So I would just caution anybody to say that anybody out there building houses is not making a good wage, because they are.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for the presentation.
Really great.
I'm sorry, we don't take questions during study session, except at open comment during the regular. So, I'm sorry, we don't interact with the.
We can talk separately. Later.
Yes, that was referenced during the meeting. Council President Bransford, I would like to make a motion to postpone this next segment to a later council meeting. I think it's wonderful that people are here. However, these are very in-depth discussions. We're right at 6 o'clock. We have 2 council members plus the mayor absent on this important discussion about the city's future. And I think it would be a wonderful decision to move it so that everyone can be present, and also because this is a deep conversation with each of these, and we've already allotted all the time that we have had budgeted. Other people may have meetings and obligations that are in the staff and would need to leave now. Thank you.
Okay, well, we do have another half an hour. So I guess maybe we could see where we get to, although, is there a second?
We don't do motions in a study session setting.
Okay, that's why I'm not council president.
Council
so-
President Bransford, we did allocate 30, we felt 30 minutes would be sufficient for this presentation since it was just an update.
Okay, I misread the time allotted. So, okay, well, we have 30 minutes and there's 30 minutes. allotted.
Just for clarification, so now study sessions are going until 6:30
Yes,
from, because
There's actually no time limit on your study sessions, but we try to keep them to 6:30.
yep, formally it's 3:30 to 6:30.
Okay, well, just to clarify. Okay, but then also I want to make sure there's plenty of time allotted for questions, because I think discussion and questions are where people retain information and really are able to participate. So I would just make sure we allot plenty of time for that as well. Thank you.
Just working on getting the slides up there. Good, okay.
All right, good afternoon, Council President Bransford and council members. My name is Ryan, I'm with Community Development, and I'm here to give the Comprehensive Plan 5-year plan, Comprehensive Plan 5-year update, along with Elliot, who will be up here momentarily to talk through a couple slides as well. So just to kick us off, I want to forecast our policy considerations, which is to acknowledge everything that has changed in our community since the comprehensive plan was adopted roughly 6 years, 5 and change ago, as well as take this moment to review our comprehensive plan policies and goals to see if tweaking those are needed, and then provide feedback specifically, seek your feedback specifically on the scope of work that we are proposing for this 5-year plan update. And so to start, I'll just reiterate that a comprehensive plan is a policy tool for a city to use that really sets their guiding principles. The comprehensive plan here in Rochester, Planning to Succeed 2040, is specifically predicated on the integration of land use and transportation and how important that is. It's built on enhancing our urban environment and livability, a lot of what Irene and Josh just talked about as well. And then it really emphasizes strategic growth and infrastructure improvements through strategic growth management policies. I'll reiterate the 7 core principles that the comprehensive plan is built upon that I think are all very prevalent here still today, if not more prevalent than they were 6 years ago. So I think it's important for us to take a moment and remember really what our comprehensive plan is built on. I'll jump into the comprehensive plan goals. So there are 21 goals in the comprehensive plan, each with their own corresponding policy considerations. I want to pause here for a moment. There was a summary in the packet as well of sort of some of the accomplishments that have happened over the last 5 years and change since the comprehensive plan has been in place. I won't go through each of these individually. I am going to highlight a couple of them over the next couple of slides, but I think it's important to look back and realize everything that you folks and the staff have accomplished over the last 5 years. A comprehensive plan is not going to make changes overnight. That's why it's a 25, 30-year planning horizon. So 5 years is a really small portion of that. And yet we can have a big impact over that 5 years. You're not going to see it day to day, but when you take a step back and look at everything that has happened, you can really acknowledge what setting a good foundation with a solid comprehensive plan can accomplish. There was some mention of some state bills. I will note that because of these goals, a lot of what's in the state legislature on different bills at the moment, we've already accomplished here locally. And that's, again, a testament to the good comprehensive plan that we have in place. And so Elliot and I will reiterate this throughout our presentation, but this update is really to update the comprehensive plan and not to start fresh, not to start over, because the document we have in place is a really solid foundation to bring to life a lot of these goals that we're talking about here today. So a couple that I'll call out. Goals number 1 and 2, again, very prevalent for the discussion that we just had, to increase Rochester's housing diversity and to have sustainable, efficient, and cost-effective development. I'm going to take a little bit of time to walk through some of the numbers on this slide. So first and foremost, let me be clear, we do not have enough housing. We're not creating enough housing. We all acknowledge that. So I want to really emphasize that point, that we need to increase housing production. However, you know, some of the numbers that get thrown around, Maxfield called for 18,000 units between 2020 and 2030. The comp plan called for 26,000 housing units within the horizon of the plan. Over the last 5 years, we've created just under, or 5 years and change, we've created just under 8,000 housing units. And we are specifically falling behind on home ownership or single family opportunities. So I very much acknowledge all that. That being said, the comprehensive plan had some really strategic goals on the housing distribution and the importance of where those units are located. And so, again, going back to the comp plan, it focuses on integrating land use and transportation and emphasizing density and strategic locations. What you'll see here on this map that's sort of in the middle in the table to the left is that we are not creating enough housing in our downtown TOD zoning district, or downtown and TOD areas, DMC areas, whatever you want to call that, as well as in our downtown core areas. The comprehensive plan, as you can see in that middle column there, called for 33% of our new housing to be in those downtown or TOD or DMC areas, and 8% of our housing expansion to be in the downtown core neighborhoods, and we are only seeing 28% and 2%. On the flip side of that, the comprehensive plan called for 22% of our housing growth to be on the edges, urban expansion, and we are currently seeing 33%. Now, we all just talked about how to expand single family development, and so in no way, shape, or form am I saying we should slow down edge growth of single family development. If you dive in further to that 33% number, what you'll find is 65% of the housing units that are being built in urban expansion areas are multifamily housing. So what I am saying is, taking a look back at the housing we've created in the last 5 or 6 years, we need to refocus some of that multifamily growth into our strategic areas of the downtown and TOD and core neighborhood areas and off of the edge. What that will do is open up those single family opportunities where we can still have single family growth on the edge and meet our 22%. So this is a map that I've wanted for the last couple of years, and it took us a while to pull it together. So credit to the team for their work on this, but this is a super interesting map, and it tells exactly the story that we've been trying to tell. And that this results in tough decisions for you guys. And you know, certainly the highlight of that being that the decision that we all had to make on the 18th Avenue and 55th Street proposal of reducing the amount of multifamily. This is the map that would have helped tell that story. We are seeing multifamily growth in areas that do not support the integration of land use and transportation. The other thing that I wanted to call out on this slide, the map on the far right, which you've heard me say before, and I will continue to say, we have sufficient land to meet the housing needs. Either in what you're seeing there is all that highlighted orange is vacant land in the city of Rochester that's designated for residential development. And that green areas is vacant land outside the city of Rochester that's positioned with utilities and available for residential development. All combined, we have roughly 7,500 acres of vacant land. And that number on the bottom there in red, generally we reduce that number by 30% for assuming undevelopable land, infrastructure, utilities. And then if you take a 4 dwelling units per acre or an 8 dwelling units per acre, the land that we have that's vacant, that's designated for residential growth right now could create up to 20,000 to 40,000 housing units. So our role, if nothing else, as the city is to ensure that we have sufficient land to meet the housing demand. And we feel like we have that. And likely more coming after our conversation about a month from now to talk about growth management and infrastructure expansion. So again, this slide is really meant to say, look at the good things that we have done, but also think about the things that we could potentially tweak and tighten up to do even better.
So my question is on this vacant residential land. Are you talking single family dwellings? Or are you talking everything?
What do you mean?
Is it single family dwelling,
Units?
Units, or is it commercial 3, 4, 5 plexes and above?
Sure. So that 21,000 number is, let's just take that number. That's arrived at by reducing 7,500 by 30% and then multiplying it by 4 units an acre. So likely that's single family, because you're not going to have a 4 units per acre multifamily project.
Okay, so when I look at this map and I can't read it very well, you can't blow it up. There's lots there that I can see that are really not buildable, going to be single family dwellings. And I go to your left-hand side on the bottom, we're at 17% of our 2040 goal for single family dwellings.
Yep.
I'm looking for a plan. How do we get to our goal? And I mean, the residential part or the commercial part, multifamily, we're at 36%. So I get that we're getting there on that one. I don't see where we're getting there on the single family dwelling. That's been my hang up. I'm not criticizing. I think we're working together to get this done. I'm worried that we're not going to get it done.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that you just said there. And that's why my very first bullet point was we're not creating enough single family homes. We all agree on that. And as for the 36%, my primary point of this is, yes, we are seeing 36% of multifamily development, but they are not necessarily happening in areas that help us towards a sustainable growth. So those are really the 2 points. I want to agree with you. I do agree with you. I think the presentation we just had talks about some of the strategies we can use to tap into this land that is available. And I can tell you, we've had conversations with folks that are interested in those strategies. So I acknowledge that we're on the same page with your comments there.
It is a map available that you can actually read.
It could be.
Thank you.
Okay, next one. Goals 5, 6, and 13 in the comprehensive plan, again, talking about the integration of land use and transportation and why that's important for a sustainable future for Rochester. Called for specifically the development of a node and corridor transportation system. And that's what we've created over the last 4 or 5 years with the transit-oriented development zoning district, the Link Rapid Transit project to follow. There's actually an error on this slide. The City Walk 131 units is actually 300 and change after their most recent amendment. So the TOD zoning districts have accounted for roughly 925 housing units. That's a good thing. That's something for us to acknowledge and be proud of. And then likewise, we are well positioned for the growth that can occur following the Link Rapid Transit project moving forward. So I think these are three goals that we have made really good progress on over the last 5 or 6 years. Goal 7, 8, and 9. Again, the comprehensive plan, one of the core principles of the comprehensive plan is to expand housing diversity. That's really what goal 7, 8, and 9 are focused on. Goal 8 is really what we used to spur us into the creation of R2X. And there are 3 projects that have happened as a result of R2X creating roughly 20 units. I'll call out the downtown cottages as the most recent pocket neighborhood project that is receiving some pretty good feedback from folks. It's not surprising to me that the infill or that the R2X projects are delayed behind the TOD projects. Keep in mind, these have only been in place for 3 or 4 years. It takes a while for the development to follow that. I would fully expect TOD projects to happen before infill and redevelopment projects. And then I'd like to call out this map that shows roughly 875 missing middle units that already exist in duplexes, triplexes, et cetera, within our core neighborhoods in the R2X boundaries. And so I think this map does a good job of showing some of that housing diversity that already exists that we're trying to build upon.
Do you want, can I just ask a question? I'm not sure when, okay. This is a question I was gonna ask in the last presentation and a question that should have been asked in the first presentation. There's 3 packed presentations for this one council meeting. But the question is, we get focus on affordable housing, more housing, you know, making sure people aren't homeless. The question that I wish I asked, and I hope everyone has on their mind, are when you talk about diversity of homes, housing, is there a way of guaranteeing that every single home, regardless of what type of home it is, will in the future, and hopefully modified from existing homes as well, will be accessible? Because we talked right about the first presentation about people with disabilities. We talked, you know, the next presentation about the housing need. We need to make sure that every single house, every single apartment, every single townhouse, every house is accessible to every single resident, regardless of their mobile and accessibility needs. So is there something in this plan to guarantee that is the case?
Good question. I acknowledge the importance of everything you just said there. That being said, we don't have the legal authority to require that for every single unit that is constructed. We follow state building code that is outside of the jurisdiction of the city of Rochester. What I can tell you is when it is required by state building code, we absolutely ensure that it meets those requirements.
Even if it's not required, I believe it's the right thing to do. Can't we just require it?
The state of Minnesota is a min-max building code, so we cannot require beyond what is required in the building code. It's different than zoning. If it was zoning requirements, I could tell you yes. But with building code requirements, we can't exceed what's required by the state building code.
I would just add that it doesn't mean that if you have if we were to create some sort of an incentive program that you couldn't require that for certain projects, but many people build their own home. And so, for example, they might want to build a 2-story home that isn't accessible because that's what they want in that time in their life, or that may be what they also want to purchase. So there could be something that you would do, and we've done this before where there's a TIF and there's units that are definitely going to be tied to accessibility. But again, that would be, you would not win that lawsuit.
Yeah, I see we talk about prevailing wage and, you know, all the things that we do have discussion and say, and I feel it would be really important. My input to staff and to everybody is that I would think it's very important, regardless of requirements, just it is the right thing to do to allow every single person, because everyone's getting older, you know, hopefully everyone will get older, and accessibility is a need of not just people who are disabled or have accessibility issues, but those who you want to stay in their homes and you know, accommodate others. So thank you.
I got a quick question for you. You got a note here that says most of these duplexes, triplexes are located in areas built prior to single family zoning in 1972. So Sunset Terrace, Country Club Manor, Eltony Hills, Was that not zoned single family?
Those aren't the areas we're highlighting in the map. The areas that that's referring to is the areas that are zoned R2X that we went through and accounted for the missing middle housing existing in those areas.
So houses built prior probably to in the 50s.
Right, those, what I would have loved is to have an as-built unit a year for every one of those houses so that I could tell you when the average year was. That was the ask. We weren't able to get there. But I guess what we're trying to communicate through that statement is this was a lot of these missing middle housing units were likely created before zoning got in the way. And that's what R2X is really trying to open up the opportunities to recreate some of those missing middle opportunities.
Thank you.
And then the last thing really quickly, I just wanted to call out is goal number 9 there, which really was the foundation for creating the neighborhood protection standards that now exist in the zoning ordinance that you folks all were a part of and helped create. So again, I just wanted to take a look at some of the goals and some of the accomplishments that have happened over the last 5 years. And now I'll hand it off to Elliot to talk about what to look for moving forward.
Thanks, Ryan. Good evening, Council President, council members. Elliot Muller, Community Development. So I think Ryan did a really great job of running you through what we've done 2018 to today. And so when you couple all of that with the lessons that we've learned in administering the policy of the comp plan, city teammates have really come up with 4 main points that we would want to see reviewed and updated. So the first one being the future land use map, which you can see on your screen. It's the map on the right. That's really looking at guiding policy of properties outside the city, but within the urban service area. We want to figure out where we want to put low density residential, where we want to put high density residential, where we want to put mixed use, transit supportive in the future for future development. When you look at the middle map, that's our growth management map. And that really helps us guide future development outside city limits. So that's our near term, long term, beyond 2050. And most importantly, this map really helps us determine as city teammates how we facilitate future growth outside city limits. And it helps you as a city council create that dialogue of where we want to put infrastructure dollars next and expand the city. The third item that we'd want to see reviewed and updated would be supporting plans and documents. So that's, for example, up there is the active transportation plan. These are plans and documents that also further the goals of policies of the comprehensive plan, but currently are not in the comprehensive plan, aren't called out. So the active transportation plan was adopted back in 2022. So it's clearly not going to be in the comp plan since that was in 2018. So we really want to bring everything up to speed and up to date for 2024. The last thing would be research and data. We've had a census in 2020, and there's brand new American Community Service data that's out there. So we really want to make sure that our plan reflects the most up-to-date data that is out there so that we can make our best decisions moving forward. And so that all really culminates to our first action would be a request for proposal to solicit consulting firms to assist city teammates in making those reviews and updates. So you'll see 5 points up there. These are the 5, basically the scope of work that we're looking at. The first being industrial land. So we want to be able to determine those lands outside city limits that are best suited for industrial land. You may realize, as well as we realize, that there has been a reduction in industrial land throughout the city. But that's not without just cause. A lot of it has been converted to residential uses so that we can combat that residential deficit that we're seeing in the city. The second item would be analyzing existing residential and mixed use areas. As Ryan had touched on, we do have quite a bit of land in the city that is set out for single family development or other residential development. So really looking at, do we have too much, or is it an issue of location? Where, can we add more, or do we flip flop and change out some lands? Otherwise, the third one would be analyzing new and emerging forces. So just like other cities across the country, the city of Rochester is dealing with the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're seeing a change in the economy. We're seeing a change in the workforce. We're seeing a change in the workplace, and we're seeing a change in preferences of lifestyle. So that could be work from home, work-life balance, or moving from urban to rural areas. And so we really want to make sure that's encapsulated in the plan moving forward so we can make the best decisions. The fourth item would be analyzing and evaluating our current policies and goals. So Ryan did a really great job of boasting of what, all the work that we've done. That's really great. But, you know, we still have more work to do. And so we really want to make sure, what are the things that we can do to continue to push forward those goals and policies of the plan. And then the fourth would be update maps and graphs and figures. Again, as I said previously, there's been updated data. We want to make sure that we're reflective of all the data that's out there that's post 2020. Our second action would be engagement. And this is my part where I reiterate that this is an update. It's not an overhaul. So we're really looking at updating those facts, figures, text within the document. We're not looking at policy change at this time. And so that really is communicating what our community development-led engagement would look like. So we wanted to stick at inform and consult. We want to be able to inform the public of the change, and we want to be able to inform them of the process. And secondly, consulting the public. We want to make sure that what we view as success that we've done since 2018 is being viewed as that way. Mr. Wall, Councilman Wall.
Thank you. Do you have an estimate for what the study would cost for this updating?
Yeah, so the RFP has a estimate between 50,000, 70,000.
Okay.
Not to exceed 100. So
And is that already in a budget somewhere?
I believe it is, yeah.
So here's my bias. I really enjoy the information that you guys bring to us consistently. I think you're brilliant. You know, Rochester, I'd rather you guys do the study. Pay you overtime, whatever it takes. I just,
They're not eligible for overtime. They just burn out.
Councilmember Wall, thank you for, I would echo that we have an amazing,
Yeah.
amazing team. A part of this budget is that engagement piece, right? And I would say that I would hold our planning team up against any team in the country. There is still much that we could, assistance we could get from others who know how to do engagement better and marketing and communication and how you message that out. So I would say that that is an important part of this budget. And I'll let Deputy Director Yetzer also speak to this. There is also a value, I think our team believes in sometimes getting that fresh outside perspective that says you're on point, you're responding to what seems to be development trends across the country, which that's also important to consider when you think about where developers want to look to invest. And so just being cognizant of that, but I will certainly let the real experts answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Cindy has said there and appreciate the accolades that you offer there. I would just reiterate, just in case, since I wasn't at the mic, we don't intend in requesting any additional funds for this project. We have professional services funds within our budget, as well as there are some capital improvement dollars that you folks have approved to maintaining and updating plans. So that we would use out all the money within that budget. That being said, we certainly intend to do a piece of this work. If we want to do this in a timely manner, we would need additional support. So while we're certainly capable of the work, we do appreciate the outside consultants' sort of unbiased opinion as not part of the community, and it helps us get it done in a much more efficient fashion. But appreciate that.
I would agree with Mr. Wall, but I think one of the things I think people kind of miss is it's not a consultant by himself. You guys work with the consultant and it's back and forth. That's what we've done in the past, and I think that works out well.
Sure. Yeah. But just a quick question, the next steps, growth management, future land use, industrial land, inventory, those would be post-approval, or is there ongoing work?
Perfect segue.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so really, after this study session, we plan to move full speed ahead if possible. We plan to bring forward the RFP for your review and hopefully approval at the March 4th City Council meeting. And then looking to the future on this timeline here, we do plan to come back to present on March 25th study session on the growth management map update, as well as our industrial land inventory in the city. So to answer your question, really we want to kind of in tandem do most of this. Obviously, this can happen afterwards, but we really want to make sure that because they're so related, that you're keeping all of it in the same box. So moving past that, we got,
I'm sorry,
You're fine.
I misread that. Never mind.
oh, no, you're good. And so then looking forward, March, April, we would want to send out that request for proposal and advertise. And while we're advertising, city teammates would then begin doing a deep dive into the text and the data references to ensure we can update everything that we need to update in there. And then moving forward, we'd hopefully review those RFPs come April and then award a project in May. And the RFP calls for a 6-month timeline. There is some leeway to go past that, but hopefully we can see you again January 2025 for a review of that update. So with that, we'll take any questions you might have.
One other quick question is like all the engagement two things. First of all, the cottage pocket neighborhood development is really an amazing and creative use of R2X, by the way. I just wanted to shout that out because one of the things that I think, for lack of a better word, freak out neighborhoods is scale, right? And so one of the ways that we can help get a lot more density in the downtown environment is, creating density, but also creating neighborhoods that are at scale with their neighbors. So I just wanted to shout that out, that they do that along the Greenway in Minneapolis. I'm really happy to see that you're doing that because I think that's a really good thing. And the future land use map. So when we did a lot of the engagement on rezoning, there were meetings and I went to a whole bunch. Is there a similar process for that, or is that a little bit more, well, it's in the future, there's really no immediate impact? This is something that, we're just gonna present in a study session and then we'll vote on as a council.
Yeah, good question. I don't think the project is quite spelled out to that level of detail to say what exact meetings we would have and wouldn't have. I would anticipate some sort of open house at some point along the way that can talk about those changes. But I would argue that the changes we would likely see in the growth management or in the future land use map will be far less significant than what was in the comp plan or the zoning map update. And additionally, like you touched on very eloquently, these are far out and don't actually include any specific entitlement. So it would have less of an impact on the current property owner.
Yeah.
But we would still certainly have something that shows what those changes are.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you. You were looking that way. Okay, just extrapolating here, thinking about what Bransford and I commented on with the Verbo thing. It doesn't seem like it's too far of a stretch to perhaps get just a little bit of data in this consultancy on what single-family homes may or may not be offered if we were to consider that change of putting them back into full-time rentals or purchasable homes and taking them off. And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about duplex or multifamily or anything like that. I'm talking about a true single-family home that's being utilized for that.
Help me
Could that
understand the
fit
data
in
you're
this?
looking for. You're looking for a number or you're looking for how they would transition? Help me understand.
I'm looking for a number because we keep talking about numbers. We keep talking about how we're sort of missing the mark. We're not getting there. I'm just curious. We've got this many on the market right now in the city of Rochester. We don't know what we would be up against legislatively or ordinance or statute wise if we took them away, but if we took them away maybe in each quadrant or just, I'm just looking for numbers.
Let me reiterate, just so I make sure I'm understanding the data you're looking for, the total number of single-family rentals and short-term rentals that we have in Rochester.
Yes, yep, yeah.
We might be able to get that number. Let me ask the team and see if if that's a number that we can find more easily than you might think.
Thank you. And if that would be a CIA, because I don't know how much time that would take. It is an interesting number because it really, I understand the legal aspects of this. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not unsympathetic to that aspect of it, but there really are a lot in some areas. If we're worried about inventory, it is a concern. And one of the things that in Minneapolis, there was a study done, speaking of DEI, that single family home rentals actually are an inhibitor to African American and other groups that can't afford to get into more expensive houses and therefore can't build wealth. And I think that there is some synergy between our initial talk on DEI and the built environment. And I'm not saying we're going to solve the problem. I'm not saying we're going to get rid of them, but it is a consideration.
It's likely slightly outside of the scope of this work. And if you're looking for a map of where those all are, that's a bit more of a significant ask than just a number or a percentage of how many units in Rochester, something like that. So just to note, but I can look into it.
Thanks, because it just seems as though we have no data on that. And if we had data, we could perhaps plan yeah, gauge the impact. Exactly. Yeah, that's all. That's all. Yep.
Councilmember Brad, or Council President Bransford, if I might just share, you did invest in software that right now you all have access to. Any citizen of this, anyone can sign up. And Ryan, remind me what the name of it is.
Citizen access?
Like you can,
Well, are you talking about Acela Citizen Access or are you talking about Agency Counter?
agency counter, where you can go on and you can input your requests by ward, by DMC district, by any parameters that you identify, and it will tell you where there's rental house, currently rental certificates. It will tell you where there's zoning applications. It'll tell you where there's building permits, the status of them. So you do have some of that data available right now that
Okay.
you can look at.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That'd be great. I'll go find it. Yeah, please.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so a couple of questions. So I try to every month, and it's hard. I know Councilmember Palmer is on the committee of housing, but I try to attend the Housing Alliance meeting at the Rochester Area Foundation, and I've been attending for years, that group, and the partnerships and how they inform each other, the county and the city, and the city comes and speaks, and that information I find very amazing. But what has been done, even with, we have the common goal with the county, affordable housing, workforce housing, housing, to meet some of these goals that are being set here in more of an in-depth conversation. We can meet and check things off saying, yes, we've heard what they're doing, but is there real partnerships and connections with policymakers on different levels and different, areas with trying to find creative and innovative solutions for this crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I can share that we meet with the county and other agencies regularly to talk through these issues. Absolutely. I don't know.
Council President Bransford, that's also part of how the second item was informed. The item that was really specifically focused on incentives. It's also part of why the Economic Vitality Fund came forward as a sales tax project to be able to have a unique source of revenue to be able to work with. So that when, for example, the county comes forward with a project that they are going to build, own, and operate, that instead of there's lots of assumptions that we just cannot collect some of the fees, and that then creates a ripple effect of financial issues in our utilities. So one of the recommendations is to be able to have the fee waiver program, which could be part of a state request for funding of a county project or a private development. So all of the different presentations that you've had have been a part of the partnerships and relationships and conversations and meetings, and those happen across our organization and significantly within community development with the county in administration. Basically, every department is working closely with all of those partners.
Thank you. And then the other question, this is a question that been brought up before. It's very complex, or maybe I'm not, maybe more for clarification. So I apologize if this has been answered. But it was brought to my awareness by someone who really understood DMC, that the boundaries, but the boundaries can change to meet needs. So in all of these maps that you have presented, slide, the first goals, and has that been looked at working with DMC to change boundaries to encompass some of those areas that need housing? Because that is part, to my understanding, part of their mission, as well as to make sure that Rochester has housing, diversification and having adequate numbers. So how is that, has it been looked at and how would that be done? Does that need council intervention? Is that something for funding purposes, I think could open up doors?
Yeah, I could maybe take that one initially and, oh, sorry if I didn't see Cindy back there, but we're both clamoring to tell you all about it. I would just say that, there, the DMC boundary modification process has to be initiated by the DMCC board and the city council. So, this is also part of our collaboration. So it's not a unilateral decision on the part of the council to do that. Certainly the DMC, it has a number of housing initiatives embedded within the work it's currently doing. And has, made significant investments in projects within the district, whether that be tax increment financing or strategic redevelopment funding investment, like in a project like the Brick. You certainly, if you want to, you can discuss boundary modification. It may be a tool listed within the comprehensive plan, just at a broader level. But I'd also note that, like many things, there's a parallel process to the comp plan update. You're also going to be doing the 5-year update to the DMC development plan in the next couple of years. And so emphasizing the flexibility of DMC related tools for housing within that process is certainly something the council can do as part of the DMC development plan update as well.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I guess that wraps us up for today.
I would just
Oh,
point out
I'm
that your
sorry.
next study session, I can do it super quick. Next study session
Sorry,
is March
sorry, sorry.
11th, and you have 3 items on that. They are anticipated to be an hour each, and that's part of your new process for your calendar for 2024. So fire strategic plan update, Silver Lake master plan and aquatics recommendation from Parks and Rec, and an update on progress for the 311 system.
Just to note, so last meeting, we had just one item and got out incredibly early. I think that was part of my confusion too. Some study sessions last for an hour and some last behind. So another plug that if we could try to make sure that the study sessions are more balanced so that we don't have incredibly important topics cutting conversations short due to time, because efficiency is not always good government. Thank
And
you.
again, you do not have an ending time for your study session, so it's up to the council.
That's why I made a comment. Because it's up to the council. and I-